Testing two. Good morning, everybody. We're just going to wait another minute or two here for the city manager. He's apparently on his way. Magic touch. Okay, good morning, everybody. We understand Mr. Kirkpatrick is on his way, so I think what we'll do, since the rest of us are here, we'll just go ahead and start. So good morning and welcome to the Audit Committee meeting of November 26, 2015. I'd like to, before we start going through the consent agenda, I'd like to, on behalf of the committee, thank Auditor General Ken Hughes and his staff for your efforts to protect our tax dollars while providing this committee and council with direction on possible improvements. So thank you. It should also be noted that you often find examples of where the city staff are doing fantastic work, and that also needs to be acknowledged today. And I'd like to thank Mr. Kirkpatrick when he gets here for his leadership on that matter. So now to get into the agenda, any declarations of interest from committee? No. I understand Councillor Manette will be absent for today. Everybody else is here. Confirmation of minutes from the October 8th meeting. Any concerns, or are the meeting minutes confirmed?
Carried.
Carried. Thank you. We can now go through the consent agenda. So item number 1 is the Ernst & Young 2015 audit plan. Yes, there's a presentation on that, so we're going to hold that item. Item number 2 is the draft operating capital budget. There will be I'll say Councillor Cloutier has a motion on that. Do you want to do the motion now and then we can move? Hold it? Okay. We're going to hold the budget as well. Let's see here now. So item number 3, Office of the Auditor General 2016 Audit Work Plan. I would assume we probably want to hold that as well. So, and the 4th being the report, so we're going to hold on to that as well. So we're back to Ernst & Young. Okay. Susie Gignac is here. Morning, Susie. Thank you. Welcome back.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. By way of introduction, my name is Susie Janak. I'm the audit partner on the City of Ottawa Financial Statement Audit, and I have here with me who is the senior manager on the audit, and she's going to support me in going through our presentation. So as a quick update, we will go through the services that we provide, as well as the planning materiality that we've determined for the audit, our audit approach, areas where we will put specific audit emphasis, and then our audit timetable. As you'll see above, the services that we've been engaged to perform include providing an opinion on the consolidated financial statements. We will do so in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. We will also provide additional opinions on financial information of related entities and programs. We will look at internal controls as part of our audit, and in doing so, if we identify any significant deficiencies in internal control that we feel should be brought to the attention of the audit committee, we will do so. And we will also, if there are any other matters that we feel should be brought to management's attention, we will provide a management letter to them. We will also provide you with a written communication of our audit results at the end of the audit, and we will perform the translation of the consolidated financial statements and the financial highlights in the annual report of the City of Ottawa. One of the key concepts that we have to consider when we're performing the audit is planning materiality, and this is the level at which we will determine whether the financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. Our estimation of planning materiality requires judgment. We consider both qualitative, so the expenditures, revenues, and dollar amounts on the financial statements of the city, as well as quantitative factors. For the current year, we've determined that materiality will be based on 1.5% of budgeted expenditures. This is in line with the prior year, and that will be a planning materiality of $46.1 million. The preliminary materiality will be reviewed throughout the audit, so if budgeted expenditures change throughout the remainder of the year, we will review our preliminary materiality and reconsider it at that point in time. Our testing in the audit, we always want to bring to your attention, is done at a level much lower than the planning materiality in order for us to obtain sufficient audit evidence to be able to provide an opinion on the financial statements. Our audit approach for the city audit is in line with what it was in prior years. We will be looking at IT general controls over both the SAP system and the MarkView system. And we will be looking at controls over the accounts payable expenditures and payroll processes. We intend, if all goes well, to rely on those processes as part of our audit, and we will audit the other accounts and balances and significant processes using a substantive or detailed test of transaction approach. With that, I'm going to transfer over to Nita, who will walk you through our areas of audit emphasis.
Good morning, everyone. I will walk through the areas of audit emphasis, specifically in terms of the revenue recognition, which will involve performing substantive procedures specifically in relation to the taxation, government transfers, and development charges revenue. In addition, we'll also do one of the areas of audit emphasis are tangible capital assets, where we will go through and audit the tangible capital asset balances related to the fiscal 2015 year, and which will involve looking at the additions, disposals, and amortization. We'll also look at the areas of emphasis in relation to the investments, where we'll perform our audit procedures in relation to the valuation of the investments, as well as for the employee future benefits, we will audit the measurement of employee future benefits, including the review of the 2015 valuation methods and management assumptions used by the actuaries. In addition, we'll also look at the contingent liabilities, where we'll assess the completeness and we'll review management assumptions that were used in arriving for the contingent liabilities. And lastly, we'll look at the commitments, specifically completeness and accuracy of the disclosures of the commitments, including the commitments related to the Ottawa Light Rail Transit project. As you will see, our audit timetable will start. We have already done our initial planning and risk identification in the summer. We are in the process of conducting our interim audit, which is starting next week, and our execution procedures will continue for the year-end procedures, which will be done in the period of March and April, and with the reporting in May of 2016.
So that's our presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions at this point in time.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cloutier, you had a question, please, sir.
Thank you, Chair Hubley. Merci, Madame Gignac. Could you, for the benefit of my colleagues of the Audit Committee and others who are here today, just talk a little bit more about materiality and what that is in accounting terms? You know, what it means, what you're looking for. We don't expect that there'll be $41 million of errors in the financial statements, do we?
Well, when we determine materiality, we're looking at what we think users, what misstatement or level of misstatement in the financial statements would impact a user's decision with respect to those statements. The generally accepted ranges are from 0.5 to 2% of materiality for the of the balance, which would be the expenditures of $3 billion, and we've used a range not at the top end at about 1.5%, which is higher but not as high as it could be. We hope we won't find that level of error in the financial statements, but if there was that level, then we would be discussing with management. Certainly all errors that we identify that reach our summary of audit differences, we discuss with management whether they should be corrected or not, or whether they will be corrected or not, and then we move forward from there.
Is the materiality, is it the same percentage as last year?
It is the same percentage as last year.
Has it changed over the years in your auditing of City of Ottawa financial statements?
I suspect it has. I don't have the exact history. We look at things like is the entity public? Is the entity likely to go public? Is the entity in a viable business? Is it a stable environment? Those are the types of things. And so as we get more experience and, we can alter materiality based on those factors, and we feel that 1.5% is a reasonable basis for the city based on those factors.
Just one more question on this item. Have your audit emphasis and the risks, has the emphasis of the audit changed over previous years, over last year?
I think we have put more focus on the tangible capital assets. It was, I believe, a significant area in the prior year as well, but in particular because those assets were not recorded on the financial statements of the city until 2000, I believe it was 2009, but it might have been 2010, I don't recall. So that has become an area of audit emphasis.
But now they're on because that we are compelled to put them on as a compliance.
It wasn't required by PSAB until 2009,
yeah,
I believe.
Okay. And emphasis, risk. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Cloutier. Any other questions on Councillor El-Shantiri?
Just a quick question, following my colleague. So if you want to put it in a picture for us, Ottawa compared to other major cities the size of Ottawa, where do we stand on this? Do you have any idea, like what is best practice in other municipality or even outside Ontario? Like, are we in a position where you can say you are like the rest of the municipality, or we do better job, or not so?
I'm not sure that I can compare you against other municipalities as far as whether you're doing a good job or not. I can compare from a materiality perspective that the range is a limited range within the public sector accounting handbook for planning materiality, and you're definitely within that range.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor El-Shantiri. Councillor Wilkinson.
Yeah, I just had some questions about the areas of audit emphasis. You've got revenue recognition. I'm not quite sure what it means when you say, for example, the development charges review. Are you looking at money coming in as opposed to what we're collecting for? What do you actually look for in that?
So in the financial statements, development charges are deferred until the funding is actually used, so they're left on the statement of financial position as a liability until they're used to actually do whatever development is going to be, the funding is going to be used for, and at the point in time when that money is spent, it gets recorded as revenue. So we're looking at how that change between the liability and the actual revenue on the statement of operations is taking place, and that it makes sense in accordance with the standards.
So are you looking at all at what was put in the DC bylaw? There are certain amounts for certain projects and things to see if those projects' costs are in line with what was collected, or is it just the actual transfer of the money?
We do look at what the expenditures that have been incurred and the percentage based on how it will be funded that should be moved based on the expenditures that have been incurred, and so we make sure that the liability is moving into the revenue at the rate that it should be based on that
information. I said if a project was put in the DC bylaw for $2 million and it ended up costing $3 million, do you look at the fact that there was the actual amount that was estimated was way out of line or not?
No, we don't look at the over or underspending. We look at how it's recorded in the financial statements.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. So is that item received? Received. Okay. Thank you both very much for your presentations. So item number 2, the 2016 draft operating and capital budget for the Audit Committee. He has the motion.
Questions.
Questions? Okay. Councillor Clute, you want to ask your question before? No.
Thank you, Chair.
Question on the budget or no? You're good. Elon?
This might go to Ms. Jasmine, but on page 3 of the report, there appears to be a restatement of the way the budget is presented from previous years. The external audit fees are now here under the Audit Committee. Could you just confirm that that is in fact a different presentation that we have had in the past?
Yes, Mr. Chair, it is different. In previous years, most of that audit fee was presented in the FEDCO budget, and there were some other smaller audits in other programs. We've combined it all into one line item now under Audit Committee.
Is that the way other municipalities do it, as far as you know?
That is best practice to have more clarity in terms of the overall audit fees that are being charged to the city.
Okay. And I'm sure the FEDCO budget has gone down by a similar amount.
Correct.
Okay. On page 3 again, I'd like to know what the recoveries and allocations are of $177,000. That's been from 2015 and from 2016.
So I can answer that question, Mr. Chair. It's work that's been done by the Auditor General for organizations that are not city, the boards, BIAs, and there's also conditional program grants that audits.
Mr. Chair, if I could clarify. I'm sorry to clarify, but it's not actually work that's done by the Auditor General. It's primarily work that's been done by Ernst and charged to the city, and then the recoveries come from those other entities.
And again, that's for organizations that are independent of the city, but with which we could be considered a stakeholder.
That's my understanding, Mr. Chair.
Could you tell me just a little bit about $1,068,000 materials and services in the middle of the page, on page 3 of the budget? What are the services? What is?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, that would be in my budget, and that would represent all of the costs that aren't salary and benefits. So we would have telecommunications, we would have our printing, we would have the operating costs of the fraud and waste hotline, we would have training, our training costs, our travel costs, as well as the amounts for consultants who have done audit work for us.
Thank you, Vice Chair Clute. Any other questions on the budget? I have one, if I may, for Mr. Hughes, our Auditor General. I'm curious as to how our budget for audit compares to other cities, and I'll tell you where I'm going with that. I want to make sure that that you are adequately resourced to protect our tax dollars.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the annual report, which has been distributed, we on page 3 and 4, we identify our audit is our budget expressed as a percentage of the annual operating budget of the city is 0.06%. And that is below we've compared ourselves to other municipalities. There's a table on page 4. And the average of those municipalities is 0.08%, so we're 0.02% below the average. Median is 0.07, so we're 0.01%. In the province of Quebec, for example, it's quite different. In the Municipal Act, their equivalent of the Municipal Act, they actually set the budget for auditors general at 1% of a minimum of 1% of the total municipal operating budget. Now they're also responsible for the attest audit. They would do the Ernst and Young portion of the audit, but nevertheless they are certainly higher than ours.
Can I ask you to report back to the committee in the new year on this? I'd like to see a report that shows that difference, where we differ from other municipalities. But also, I'd like to get some sense from you on what we could do as a city if we were to increase the funding to what the median is. So, if you could undertake that, would it be safe to ask for that by the end of Q2?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we'll take that as direction.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Deans?
I just wanted to follow up on that very line of questioning and ask you, Mr. Hughes, if you feel that you have enough money to conduct the audits that council are asking for in a timely fashion.
Mr. Chair, it's a good question. I think I could begin by saying I'm not sure that any municipality would say that they have adequate resources to do all the audits that they would like to do. What we do in our shop is we perform a risk analysis, and I think when I met with all of the councillors when I was preparing this plan, I indicate that we look at all the activities that the city is involved in, and we focus on the areas of risk. And when we look at that work, there's probably enough work to keep us busy for 10, 12 years, and at the rate that we're going at now. If we were to throw more resources into audit, we could certainly do that work in a shorter period of time. So if the question is there enough resources to do all of the work that we have to do, the answer would be yes, but it would take time.
It's just that some audits are very timely, and if we waited 10 years to do them, they're probably not worth doing at that point.
Mr. Chair, I understand what the councillor would be saying, but because every year we update our risk analysis, we are always looking at the most relevant issues that could and should be addressed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Leeper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are becoming used, as we look through the budgets, at seeing the material and services line in different departments being reduced by 13% as a cost savings measure. There's nothing listed for service initiatives or savings in this budget. Were you asked to try to find savings within the department, or were you asked and not able to find any?
Mr. Chair, through to the councillor, our budget is actually determined through the bylaw, and the amount of our budget is determined. It's a fixed hard amount that comes to us every year. So in the answer to the question, no, we were not asked to reduce our budget by a particular amount.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper. So any other questions? Okay, Councillor Cloutier.
Mr. Auditor General, could you talk further to Councillor Dean's question? Can you talk about the risk and returns of doing an audit, the cost versus the returns of doing the audit? Not all audits result in it's always a valuable service, of course, but you don't always find issues.
Mr. Chair, audit has many purposes, and one of the purposes of audit is to find savings. But there are other activities, there are other benefits that come out of audits, and one of the, certainly one of the benefits, and it goes right back to the Municipal Act. Councils may appoint, the Municipal Act says that councils may appoint auditors general to hold themselves and the city administration accountable for the spending of taxpayer resources. And when we look at any of the areas under our review, we're looking for, first of all, were the expenditures made in accordance with the wishes of council? Was there due regard for economy and efficiency and effectiveness? And at the end of the day, there are other issues, for example, compliance issues. When we look, and there are a couple of items on our audit plan for next year, the requirements where the municipalities must comply with certain pieces of legislation. So what we also try to do every year is do a little bit of compliance work so that we're able to confirm to council that staff is ensuring that they're operating in compliance with legislation, because at the end of the day, council is responsible for those activities. So the work that we do as auditors goes beyond savings, although we are always interested in savings, and savings come from efficiencies. But our interest at the end of the day is no different than a prudent manager, because any manager would want to make sure that they're appropriately using the resources that have been trusted to them.
Councillor Elson-Tui.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for elaborating with some of the answer, Mr. Hugh. If we ask the question in a different way, do you believe you have adequate funding to do what you are doing? And I know this is a council policy and you get percentage of the total budget. I understand that, but I'm just saying, is that adequate funding? Because you've done a good job, and you and your predecessor with that budget, but in my opinion, or I think some of us would like to see eventually going back and review those audits and see where we are and see the compliance level of those audits. Some of them we review them, and some of them they have not been reviewed. Again, you just barely doing what what your audit plan is, and your audit plan always fit within your budget. So the question is, do we have the adequate funding for your shop?
Mr. Chair, through to the councillor, I think, and certainly I had a long discussion with my predecessor before he left. There's always the ability, if council saw fit, to increase the budget of our office. We would have the ability to do more work, and we would do that work. And I think getting to Councillor Dean's point, the point of timeliness, it might mean that some of those issues that will take us a couple of years to get to, it would mean that some of those issues that would take us a couple of years to get to, we would certainly get to them sooner. So in answer to the question, I think we're prudently spending the money that we have available to us. Remembering also that we're responsible for the fraud and waste hotline, and one of the things that you'll hear when we come back to report on the fraud and waste hotline in June is that's an activity that is growing. It's a very important activity, and I don't think when it was implemented it was imagined that it would occupy so much of the resources of our shop. And I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't be doing that work. I'm suggesting that it's occupying some resources that could be dedicated to audit. And taking the commitment that we've made to the chair, we'll come back and report on some changes that we can make in that area. But there was a second point that the councillor made that I would like to address, and that is that when work was done by this office in the past, and as we continue to do our work, there is a requirement that we do a follow-up audit. And we generally go back about 2 to 3 years after the audit is complete, and we look at how management has complied with the commitment that they made when they agreed with the recommendations that followed out of the audit report. And we come back to council and report on their progress. We came back with a number of audits in October, you'll recall, and we'll probably be doing some at the end of the first quarter, beginning of the second quarter. And generally, for the most part, we can say that we can absolutely make the statement that management is committed to implementing the recommendations that come out of the audits.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Oshaturia. In wrap, sorry, technical issues here with the mic. Just to wrap up on that, Mr. Hughes, I think what committee members are trying to identify here is, to use your example, the fraud and waste hotline, if the city in the next budget considers to put more money into the operating of that, the potential is there for recoveries much beyond what the cost is. So, to Councillor Leeper's point about should we be cutting audit, honestly, I think most of us feel we should be putting more money into audit. Would that be a fair statement?
Mr. Chair, I think generally across the country, most, and this isn't exclusively confined to municipalities, but any entity looks upon audit as an investment. And when we look at the return on investment in audit from other municipal entities across the country, they range from a return of $11 for every dollar invested to $20 for every dollar invested. So certainly spending money in audit brings a return.
So as part of that direction for a report in the new year, could we touch on that as well, as what kind of returns we're getting and what we might be able to expect? So if there's no other questions, Councillor Cloutier, I believe you have a motion, roadmap motion on this for us, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Moved by myself that the Audit Committee recommend that Council, sitting as Committee of the Whole, approve the Audit Committee 2016 draft budget operating resources requirements stated on page 3.
Is that motion carried? Carried. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Now, moving on to the Office of the Auditor General 2016 Audit Work Plan, and I believe you have a presentation for us, Mr. Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could, I would like to just take a very brief second to introduce, we have joining us today, and if they could stand up behind me if you could, 3 individuals from the Canadian Comprehensive Auditing Foundation. The Program Officer of International Programs, Michael Belanger, is here, and then we have 2 fellows, Kwaku Akenyena from Ghana and Frank Kioni from Tanzania, and I would certainly like to welcome them. Thank you. Okay. Bonjour, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Auditor General, just one moment. I have a motion.
Sorry, Mr. Hughes, we're just going to do a quick motion to waive the rules here.
Thank you, Chair. Moved by myself, whereas the Office of the Auditor General's 2016 audit work plan was not circulated with the agenda package, therefore be it resolved that the Audit Committee approve the addition of this document for consideration by the committee at today's meeting pursuant to Section 89(3) of the Procedures Bylaw, being Bylaw 2014-441.
That carried? Thank you. Okay, Mr. Hughes, sorry for the delay. Please proceed.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Chaque année, nous présentons notre plan de travail. La méthode appliquée pour élaborer les plans de vérification comprend les étapes clés suivantes. Des réunions avec les conseillers et la haute direction, des examens de la documentation budgétaire, des examens des vérifications précédentes de la ville et des examens de plans de vérification d'autres municipalités. Every year we come and present our annual work plan, but before we come, there's a certain amount of work that we do, and in preparation for that work plan, we meet with councillors and city managers. We review the budget documentation of the city. We look at our previous audits. We review work plans from other cities. We get our input from our own staff. We meet with the external auditors and review any management letters that they have sent or management letters that we have sent in the past. And then, and you've heard me talk about risk assessment before, we assess all the city programs against certain selection criteria as we perform our risk analysis. And then, of course, we go through all of the fraud and waste hotline reports that we received in the previous year. So this year, our work plan, our specific areas of audit, as you can see in the report, we will be auditing the LRT planning and change management process. We will be auditing the emergency preparedness and response for health services. We propose to audit the regulatory framework for light rail transit. And as I spoke earlier when we said that from time to time we do compliance work, we'll be looking at the city's compliance with legislated ambulance service documentation. And we will be auditing the management of the Lansdowne contract. And finally, and in relation to an audit that we did last year and two that we've done this year, we're going to audit IT remote access controls. We're also going to be doing the follow-up of the 2014 audits. And just to let the committee know, some of the work that we have in process includes another audit of infrastructure services, specifically an audit of projects, an audit of Service Ottawa, an audit of child care services, an audit of the automated meter reading project, an audit of markets management, including the Byward and the Parkdale markets, and an operational review of environmental services. We'll be coming back to committee with our follow-up audits, and we'll continue to work on the fraud and waste hotline, and we expect to be back in the latter part of June with our annual fraud and waste hotline report. We'll also be updating our fraud risk analysis here at the city. I should point out to the committee that when we identify these areas that we're going to perform audits, that doesn't mean that you can expect 6 reports. In some cases, and you'll see that today, in some case we decide to take an area and divide it up into a couple of audits, and that means that we also issue separate reports. There are times when, in our view, there are issues that are significant enough for us to bring to the attention of management, but not necessarily bring to the attention of committee. And we would issue management letters, and those aren't, we make committee is aware of their existence, but the details aren't shared with the committee. Then, of course, we will administer the fraud and waste hotline, and we will update our risk analysis. Conformément à l'avis juridique du greffier municipal et des chefs de contentieux, les vérifications et suivis suivantes ne seront présentés qu'une fois que tout arbitrage et au litige lié aura pris fin. C'est le suivi de la vérification portant sur l'inondation du secteur ouest et sur les processus d'examen des projets d'aménagement dans le bassin hydrographique de la rivière Carp, et aussi les pratiques en matière d'approvisionnement contrat de site d'enfouissement Spring Hill. There are a couple of audits that we've withheld on the advice of the city clerk and solicitor, and those two reports that are held will be a follow-up to the 2010 audit of the West End flooding event and the development review processes within the Carpview watershed, and a 2011 audit of the procurement process for the Spring Hill landfill. One of the things that I neglected to point out is that when we do any of our audits, we include, where it's applicable, a review of succession planning in the area under review. We identify any potential savings, as I indicated earlier. We do a review of occupational health and safety, and in addition to performing a risk analysis of an entity, we're also reviewing the risk analysis that is done within that entity. So, Monsieur le Président, notre prochaines étapes seront de préparer nos affectations de travail, communiquer avec le bureau du directeur municipal, établir le calendrier des vérifications. Our next steps, of course, are to prepare our work assignments, contact the city manager's office to indicate the start of that work, and then actually schedule those audits. And that's our proposed work plan for 2016, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Hughes. Before I go to questions, I'm going to take advantage of having the microphone and ask the first question here. There's something missing from this work plan that I'd like to ask if it's possible to add, and that would be if you could consider doing an audit of the waiting list for social housing. I've discussed this with the chair of Ottawa Housing, Councillor Fleury, who's here today, and also Stéphane Gregoire, the head of Ottawa Housing, and we all agree that it would be much a big help for the city if we had a better picture of who's on that waiting list and what their needs are. Would it be possible to do something like that for us?
Mr. Chair, I think that's something that is worthwhile doing, and something that we could do. What I have actually started to do is reach out. There's a number of entities that have their hands in that process, and what I have to do is find out what we can do, and also find out what others have done. So, for example, I'll be contacting the Provincial Auditor General to see if any work has been done in that area, and I'll also be liaise with our city housing provider and some of the other providers, as well as the operators of the auto registry. So certainly we could take that as a direction, and we could provide an update when we come back at our next meeting, which is likely the end of Q1 or beginning of Q2.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I was just thinking, because I used to chair and I know I've had my issues with before we get into an audit of it, I really think we should have a report on what they actually do now, because I think part of the problem is our policies, which an audit is not going to help with. And if we could take a look at how we actually do that waiting list now. For example, there are people on that waiting list that are waiting for either a bigger unit or a smaller unit. They're actually housed now. And that's information I was trying to get before. And I think if we got our housing branch, we could do it by notice of motion, to bring forward a report on how that's put together and do some of that work first. It would simplify a later audit.
Well, that can be part of your report that you're talking about coming back to. You can look at and see if that would help.
Perhaps I can ask Mr. Kirkpatrick, too, if he could think about that with his staff, of how we might get some of that information.
So what the Auditor General's agreed to do is look into the feasibility of doing this, so he can take that.
I think we need to have more information generally on what it's all about.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Wilkins. Councillor McKinney.
Thank you, Chair.
When we are looking at the housing list, though, what I'd like to get a more fulsome picture then, if we're going to go there, around what are we doing in terms of moving people out of the shelters and into housing. What are the requirements for taking people when our housing services need to take people from priority lists? There are different priority lists. Some of them are provincially regulated, but there's also our own priority list where we have some flexibility. And my understanding is that we take more than what we actually put resources into to house people from the shelters. So it's a bit of a redirect from the shelters into our Ottawa community housing. And I know from my experience in my ward, it really has undermined a lot of the work that Ottawa community housing has done. It has added a lot of folks to buildings who are unable to care for themselves, and it has actually increased the issues. So in the buildings themselves, it's destabilized some of the buildings, some of the floors in the building. So if we're going to go down there, I'd also like to look at a fulsome evaluation of who we're moving out of the shelters and how we are then resourcing those folks.
Mr. Chair, if I could, I think what I'm hearing, and having looked at this issue well over a decade ago, I know it's a complicated issue. And I think what I can propose is that as we plan for this, obviously visit Councillor Wilkinson and Councillor McKenney, and because of the knowledge that they have in this area, if I could.
Councillor Deans.
Thank you. And Mr. Hughes, if you could just include me, I'm the chair of CPS, Housing falls under CPS, and Aaron Burry and Janice Burrell. As you probably know, we've just recently changed the way we're managing the waiting list, so I don't know if it's time. I was just pointing out that as the chair of CPS, this falls under CPS, so myself and Aaron Burry and Janice Burrell should be involved in this conversation. And since we just changed the way we manage the waiting list, I'm not sure it's timely, but if you come and talk to us about it, we'd be happy to have that discussion. I have two issues that I wanted to raise this morning relating to the audit. And the first one is around Phase 1 LRT. So I'd just like to understand more fully what the audits exactly are that you're proposing. The audit of LRT planning and change management, so an operational review, and the audit of the regulatory framework for light rail transit, also an operational review. Can you just tell us what that would encompass?
Mr. Chair, through you to the Council, I think when we look at the significance of the project and the expectation that must exist out there with the community, I'm certain that there's been a significant amount of planning done when that button is pushed or that switch is turned. And auditors often go in after something is done and all the files have been put away, and do their work, and then they prepare a report saying these are the mistakes that were made. And what audit can increase their value, in my opinion, if before something actually happens, if we can go in and look at, in this particular instance, the planning and change management for the beginning up for the launch. And if we can provide any third-party insight into any tweaking that could be done to that plan, then I think we've provided better value to the taxpayer rather than come in a year or two after the launch and say, here are the mistakes that you made. So in that instance, it's taking a look in advance and reporting back saying, everything's perfect, or these small changes could be made. In relation to the audit of the regulatory framework for light rail, in the past, the regulation of the network would be done by the federal government. And in this particular case, they've handed this over to the municipality. And what we would like to do is something similar that we're talking about with the audit of the planning for the launch of the program, is look at how we plan to set up the management of the regulatory framework, so that we can, before something happens, we can come up with an opinion on the completeness of the plan or some suggestions for improvement.
Okay, well, Mr. Hughes, you'll know when you came to see me that what I'm really interested in auditing around Phase 1 LRT is the real and associated costs. What did it actually cost the taxpayers for Phase 1? And not just the direct costs, but the indirect costs too, the cost of the things that we had to do in preparation, the 75 double-decker buses that we bought, the doubling of the tracks in the old train line to accommodate the pedestrian footbridge over the 417. What was the total bill associated with Phase 1 for the taxpayers? And I think before we rush headlong into Phase 2, we need to understand what this is really costing. So I know you've committed to undertaking that work in 2017, but I really think it needs to be done in 2016, because I think we need to understand what it's costing before we embark on a new phase of the project. So I'm wondering if you could move that into the 2016 work plan.
Mr. Chair, through to the council, I wouldn't, if I wouldn't have the resources to do that project and the work that I'm planning here. I would have to either have additional resources, and I couldn't even estimate what they would be at this time, but and that would either be additional contracted resources or take some of this work off the list.
Okay, between now and when this rises to council, could you send us a memo and tell us what the resource need would be in order to complete that work in 2016?
Mr. Chair, I can certainly come up with an estimate as to what that might require, but be fully advised that it would be an estimate.
Okay, thank you. The other thing I want to talk about is the audit of the management of the Lansdowne contract. What would that involve?
Once again, as we discussed when we met, as an auditor, rather than come in a couple of years from now and say that these certain mistakes were made in the management of the contract, since the project is new and is just starting, what we would like to do is look at how the project is managed, how it's set up to be managed by staff, the proposed reporting through to council, so that once again, in my opinion, we can provide better value to our taxpayers by coming in before an event to improve the reporting process or the management process.
Okay. I wonder if you might be able to add to that audit an update of the financial analysis of the Lansdowne Partnership Plan to determine if the financial model remains sound in light of the new information that Council received yesterday.
Mr. Chair, seeing the newspaper article this morning, I went back and I looked at the work that had been done by the office previously, and they looked at the soundness of the financial model. And if I understand the council correctly, you would want an audit of
I think of the whole waterfall. I mean, in my mind, it's an overly complicated financial model. It's difficult for all of us to understand. The new recommendation is that through the waterfall, that we back a loan for OSEG, and then through that waterfall gets paid back, which, as I understand it, ends up costing the taxpayers almost $16 million down the road. I'd just like to understand if we still have a financially sound model now that things have changed.
Mr. Chair, when I reviewed the report that was done earlier, the review of the model found that it was found that the financial assumptions were reasonable given the information that was available at the time. There's new information. I think that the type of financial review that the council will be talking about is something that could be done now, or it could be done at any time in the future. I mean, if I had to guess, and I think when we spoke in your office, I indicated that at some point, either in my term or my successor, we would obviously be looking at the operation at Lansdowne, how that contract is working out for the City of Ottawa. Much like the last request, I don't have the resources to add that to my work plan without taking something out. And you know, the question is this the opportune time to do this type of review? It's something that would be done certainly within the next 5 to 7 years anyway. So I would have to say, could we do this? Yes, we could.
But it wouldn't seem resource intensive to do an update to that financial model, would it?
My understanding, the contract is signed, and the contract determines how the profits are shared and how the losses are allocated. And that's not going to change no matter what the actual activities. I think what appears to be changing perhaps is the return on the investment.
Right.
Now that there is some additional knowledge. Now, I would imagine my recollection from the little bit that I had to do with the little bit that I've heard of the contract is that there are regular reviews built into the agreement. Is there not?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dean. There's other
Councillor going to answer that.
Okay, Mr.
That's correct, Chair, through you to the Councillor. The project agreement provides for the city to have the right to audit the financial statements, and I should point out, though, that the financial statements that OSEG submits to the city, as you'll see next week at FEDCO, those are audited financial statements. An external auditor audits those. I think I also point out that in 2016, so the first half of 2016, once OSEG has completed all of the activities related to the construction and the fit-up and the leasing of all of the components, including the retail, we will be going in. We will probably use an external auditor to do that, to review all of the accounts, to do a final assessment of the costs that have been capitalized within the waterfall, to make sure that they are acceptable, reasonable, and in accordance with the agreement. And then I think, though, your comments are probably more focused on the pro forma and the expected return and how does that change. And that an updated pro forma will be presented by OSEG every year. So council, in that annual report, which will come every year, will see what's changing, up, down, positive, negative. And in terms of if what you're focused on when you say a review of the model, because the Auditor General is correct, the model, we've committed to that contractually with OSEG. So if you're concerned about changing the model, that option doesn't exist other than through negotiation with OSEG. If it's understanding...
Well, they seem to want to negotiate with us.
Well, there's a dispute that the contract provides for a resolution or a process for the resolution of, and we'll get into that next week.
Yeah.
My own view is that with I would look at what the Auditor General is already proposing in his 2016 work plan, which is a review of the administration, the management's oversight of the contract and the reporting to council. If what you're looking for is a confirmation that the information council's getting about this from OSEG and from management is what you should be getting, I would suggest that should be a focus of that audit.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kirkpatrick. Sorry, we have Councillor El-Shantiri, Councillor Blais. Just before you start, Councillor El-Shantiri, if I may, for the benefit of those that are here listening or visiting the committee, I think it's important to recap how we come about these work plans. What we do is the committee works on this year-round. The Auditor General visits with each of the councillors to see what they would like to have added onto the work plan, and then the Auditor General comes up with a plan that he can do based on the resources provided him in the budget. Unfortunately, we're not able to add large resource-intensive audits onto the plan at the last minute like this. So, Councillor Deans, unless you have someone to move a motion for those, I certainly as chair would not be supporting either one of those additions to the work plan. Do you have someone to move a motion? Or? Okay. Thank you. Councillor Asanturi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hughes, just to follow on my colleague, the chair, on to include in your work plan the social housing. In the past, I believe in 2006, we had a request on audit for the, and we had some information because the list, I think, I've been in Ottawa for 40 years, and I always, from day one, I heard we have 10,000 people on the waiting list, and 40 years later, still 10,000 people on the phone. So I'm not sure if just a number we use or there's actual 10,000, and is that 10,000, how many people apply and reapply, and how many. Councillor Shirley, can we have the attention? Thanks, buddy.
Mr. Chair, I remember doing an audit of this back in 1995, I think. But there is a legislation that has to be followed by all of the players, the municipality, the housing providers, as well as the social registry. And before we could actually decide what we're going to look at, we've got to find out who's looking at what and who's responsible for what.
And I hope, Mr. Hughes, we can find out. Like we have multiple people take. Just like now with the refugees, so many agencies saying we're helping, but we have people applying, but it doesn't, until we had the Refugee 613 to streamline this process. So the same thing with the social house, a lot of people apply through Nepean Housing, Gloucester, Vanier, West Carleton. We need to know that list. Is it one list? Is it going back to the main pool, or just everyone carry their own list? Because also we have the Francophone social, so that's why we failed the last time, to get a handle on the number, so we'll have a better understanding what is the list, the exact number of the social house, and the folks who qualify. I know that's a different process with other agencies at other level of government to find out who's legit and who's not. But I'm looking at just the list itself. How could we streamline and get an accurate number on the list? Will that be part of your audit?
Mr. Chair, there's a separate entity that maintains that registry. And my understanding is that that's a centralized list, and that list would have everyone within the municipality, and all housing providers participate with that housing registry. But I think there's information that we require, and I'll get the information that's needed and come back to committee with that information.
Okay, and if I can follow up on the audit plan, Mr. Hughes, you mentioned on the advice of our solicitor clerk, there's a couple of items, but there's a few items we've been asked for quite some times, like Spring Hill landfill. Where is that? And there's a timeline about this, and where we can see a reporting on this?
Mr. Chair, I think I'd defer to the...
Again, Councillor Shirley talking to the solicitor.
Okay. Sorry, Councillor Shirley, if we can interrupt your conversation, we need to...
Mr. O'Connor, I'll repeat the question. In the auditor's work plan, there's a couple of items. The auditor indicates is not going to be able to audit based on advice from our legal. One of those items I had requested in the past is a full audit for Spring Hill landfill. And can you tell us where's the legal status on this file?
Sorry, just on a point of order, Mr. Chair, it would be nice if everyone would pay attention to the questions and the answers, and if people who are walking around aren't interrupting either the chair or the staff who are needed to answer those questions.
Thank you, Councillor Blay, and I agree. So, Councillor Shirley, could you please take a seat and let us conduct the business of the committee, please?
So, Mr. Chair, the Spring Hill landfill arbitration has been through the first part of the process for commercial arbitration, which is the issue of liability, and the arbitrator has ruled on that. It is a confidential report at this point in time. Now the process is switched over to the damages issue, and we are currently going through the arbitration on that process as well, so it continues on.
Can you give us an idea about the timeline, Mr. O'Connor?
I can certainly go back and check, Mr. Chair. I don't have it off the top of my head.
So we'll get our update through the auditor or through your office?
I can certainly provide that, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Blais? You want to?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I wanted to follow up on some of the questions from Councillor Deans relating to the LRT Planning and Change Management operational review. And I appreciate the value that might bring. I guess I'm wondering, is there a contradiction in, there are myriad programs underway at OC Transpo to prepare for the implementation of light rail in 2018. There's a lot of work that goes into that. Is there a risk that in attempting to address your audit, that time will be taken away from those exercises to answer your questions, and therefore we'll have a gap in the implementation? I guess, what is the risk there? And is it an acceptable risk?
Mr. Chair, I think that's an excellent question. I mean, one of the things that you always have to balance as an auditor is how you are interrupting the auditee. And I can tell you that that anyone who spent a significant amount of time auditing is very aware of how valuable the time is of the auditee. The auditors wouldn't put themselves in a position where they would needlessly take time of individuals when it's taking them away from the real work that they have to do. I mean, we're fully aware that that every single person that we're speaking to their day is already committed to do the activities that they have to do, and we know that when we're talking to them, it's time away from the valuable work that they have to do. But most of the work of the auditor is done in examining evidence, examining data, examining material. And the better, the least interruption by an audit occurs when there is good a good liaison between the audit shop and the auditee, and there is full cooperation in making everything available beforehand. And sure. I can assure you that staff are very conscious of how valuable people's time are, and I can tell you that they would be just as conscientious on this occasion.
Sure. So given that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding that this is not necessarily a financial audit, but more of a operational implementation audit, planning, et cetera. What type of expertise is your office going to bring to bear in transit planning versus a financial expert or an accountant, et cetera?
Before, Mr. Chair, before we plan for every audit, we look at the opportunity to engage a subject matter expert if we're required, and this certainly would be an area where we would likely bring in a subject matter expert. And that individual would be working with auditors who would specialize in planning as well. So it's when you get into a complicated area, a specific area, it's absolutely imperative that we have individuals that know what they're talking about, so that they can obviously minimize the amount of time that they require of the auditee.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Kirkpatrick, you'd like to follow up on that?
Yes, I would just add that as Chair Blais knows, and as Councillor Deans knows from chairing the Transit Commission previously, there is a huge amount of effort going into this at the over the last year, and will continue through to 2018. Mr. Manconi is leading frankly, a transformation of OC Transpo to be able to run a bimodal transit system. So there's huge effort on his part and that organization's team to be ready. There's a huge focus by the Light Rail Implementation Office, working with RTG to ensure that all of the issues and risks are previous to that train running when it's supposed to run, and when it runs, running with an acceptable performance. A huge focus on that. It's something that I have brought corporate governance to with an executive steering committee on the project. We just had a presentation yesterday from Mr. Manconi to executive management on the risk identification that's being done with world-class experts, Infrastructure Ontario, Metrolinx. We're spending a lot of time on this. But what I would say is that frankly, I've told management of the city that the number one reputational risk to the city of Ottawa in this term of council is that train must run on time, and when it's running, it must run at a high level of performance and meet the expectations of all of the stakeholders. That's our key focus, and I have complete confidence that Mr. Hughes his review, interim participation in that will be value added. I know I've talked to Mr. Manconi about that, so we welcome this element of his 2016 work plan.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick. Mr. Blade, did you? Or Councillor Blade, sorry. Okay, thank you. Yes, I know. I'll do a recap here for everybody so you know what the list is right now. Next would be Councillor Cloutier, Councillor Chiarelli, Councillor Wilkinson, and then Councillor Eglai. But before we go to Vice Chair Cloutier, I'd like to ask the City Solicitor to chime in on earlier we were discussing the work plan, how it comes about to come here. If you could just tell us exactly what the bylaw says so everybody knows. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, Section 11 of the Auditor General's bylaw indicates in 4 precise sections. Subsection 1 says in each year subsequent to the year of appointment, the Auditor General shall submit an annual plan for the next following year to City Council for information by December 31st of each year. Subsection 2 says the Auditor General may, at his or her discretion, prepare a longer-term audit plan for submission to City Council. Subsection 3 says no deletion or amendments to the annual audit plan shall be made except by the Auditor General. And subsection 4 says, despite subsection 3, the Auditor General may, if requested by City Council or a Board of Directors, audit and report on additional matters. Now, Mr. Chair, in light of that last comment, one would have to go then to subsection 14.2 of the bylaw, which talks about the annual budget. And I'll read the first part because I just want to provide clarity because you did the budget just momentarily. 14.1 says the annual budget of the Office of the Auditor General shall be in accordance with the budget strategy for the term of council. So some members may recall previously there was some restrictions and things. Those were all withdrawn by council a few years ago. But subsection 2 says requests by City Council or a Board of Directors pursuant to subsection 11.4 above shall be subject to the provision of appropriate funding. So at the end of the day, Mr. Chair, this would be, if either of those cases, sort of a matter for council to ultimately make the decision on the budget.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Connor. So it sounds like we're playing by the correct rules here, so thank you. And in the end, it's the work plan, and what we're going to do here is receive it. Okay, Councillor Cloutier.
Thank you, Chair. And Mr. O'Connor has said in legal terms what I wanted to say. It is important to recognize the independence of the Office of the Auditor General. He and only he decides based on risks and his professional judgment what is worthy of audit. At the end of the day, he receives our advice, I believe, but at the end of the day, he or she or his office will determine what the audit plan is, because we want to ensure that we are not asking the Auditor General to get into what might be considered a political issue. He or she audits the, like LRT, like Lansdowne, which has been passed, the results, but not to redo, refight issues that were determined in their proper form at committee or at council. Once he's received representation from staff or the city, he's available to and welcome to comment on it if he feels that it was somehow misleading. But my point is, the independence of the office is very, very, very important, and we should be respectful of that.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Mr. Hughes, did you want to add anything to that, or you're okay?
No, Mr. Chair, I'm okay with that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wilkinson? Oh, sorry, Councillor Chiarelli. As long as you promise you're not going to try to move a motion with the word red blacks in it, okay. I'll give you a microphone.
The initial point I was going to make was exactly what the city solicitor said. This process is set up so that the chance for members of council to make comments about adding or deleting or making requests to the AG to add or delete happens right here today and then at committee. So the meetings that may happen behind closed doors leading up to this have no status. So there's no such thing as this plan has arrived today and you're too late to make changes. In fact, this is a place where we should be in front of the public suggesting any changes we want. Not earlier, not later. And then the AG can say, sorry, I think we should audit the other things instead. And that's the way the process is. So I think Councillor Deans is correct. If she wants to make proposals here, this is the place to make them. This is a day to make them. And between now and council, the AG will make some sort of calculation as to which ones are right, which ones are wrong, which ones should be delayed or sped up. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, I think that what I indicated that I would do is identify the resources that that might be required for an audit of that significance, and then we know what the trade-offs are, which would be additional resources or which work isn't being done.
Yeah, and I think it would be helpful to, or the members of council may think it would be helpful to have that kind of thing audited at this point, because we're already making decisions about phase 2. It might make sense to know how phase 1 is going before we make those decisions. And so whether that happens now or 12 months from now, I'm not sure. But I still want to point out this is the right place and the right day to make those suggestions.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Chiarelli. Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Just very quickly, I think a couple of things that have been talked about here are really not Auditor General items. For example, the housing registry, that can be a report that comes to us explaining how they do it, and we can then say where we want more information. I'm very well aware that a lot of that 10,000 isn't 10,000 people on the street. Most of them are in housing already. They want bigger, smaller, less expensive, all sorts of different reasons, or want to move. And I think we need that information by going through Councillor Dean's committee, which is where that's appropriate, not the Auditor General. If it doesn't work out, then the Auditor General is at later. This is the second one on the costs of all the different things that are going about with the LRT, because we're constantly hearing we have to do this year because of LRT. I think we can ask staff for that. I think we can ask the city manager with his departments to put together what are the projects, we may miss one or two, but we'll get most of them, that are happening because of LRT. We've been told we have to do this water and sewer project now because we need to have it done for the LRT coming, etc. And I don't really think, again, that's an audit requirement. And what you're going to do on the preparedness, I think, is important. But to know what it actually costs, we should start at the staff level first. If we don't like it to get there, then an audit maybe later might be appropriate, but not now. So I don't know, Mr. Kirkpatrick, is it possible to get that information just as a memo to council?
Yes, of course.
I think that, could I just make that a direction, Mr. Chair? Just, if they do that, I think that would answer some of Councillor Dean's questions, at least the start of them.
I'll speak to the staff involved, and I'll get back to you with an answer, but within a month, I would think. And subsequent to that, if you wanted it reviewed by the Auditor General, it could be. But I agree, management should provide you with that information first.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. Councillor Aguilar?
Mr. Chair, could I ask a clarification then? So that, Mr. Chair, does that mean then that that we will stand down on the request on what it would cost to determine the costs of Phase 1?
How about we let Councillor Aguilar ask his question, and then when we go to, before we receive the work plan, we'll clarify what we're going to do out of all that's been said. Is that okay? Thank you. Councillor Aguilar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to applaud your approach on the LRT audits that you do have in your work plan. I think to be proactive, so we're going to find out if there's a problem rather than finding out there's a problem and then complaining about the fact that there's a problem. So I think it's a very healthy change in how we're going to conduct audits. My question, though, goes to more of the mechanics of it, because some of what you're going to be looking at hasn't actually happened yet. So are you going to be looking to other LRT systems across Canada and North America and making comparisons? Like mechanically or practically, how are you going to do this audit? Because, again, some of the things you're looking at we haven't done yet.
Mr. Chair, excellent point. I mean, the reality is the risk of going in and auditing something before it happens is there are some elements that cannot be audited. But in the same way that that when we determine what we are going to do as an audit shop each year, we perform a risk analysis of the city and look at the areas that that deserve our attention. That's certainly one of the strategies that that the team, that the individuals preparing to do this launch would have looked at. We would have looked at the project, the controls around the project planning process. We would have looked at how they reviewed their environment, and that's why it's important, as Councillor Blaise pointed out, that we make sure that we do have a subject matter expert to ensure that that an individual who's seen activities like this in the past is going to know what should be in place in those situations. Have they been addressed in this particular instance? What are some of an individual with experience would know some of the things that have gone wrong in the launch of other projects, and have they been accounted for, or at least addressed to see if there are risks here, and how have they decided to mitigate that risk? So but the biggest risk when you look at something before it happens is that because the actual activity hasn't happened, there's going to be some elements that might be missed. But if you focus on looking at the most significant items, you're generally going to pick up the areas of greatest interest and greatest risk to the project.
And once you finish that audit of what we should be doing as opposed to what we are doing, how is that going to integrate with Mr. Manconi's shop? So how much runway are they going to have, I guess is what I'm saying, before they open the doors and start the system? Are they going to have your audit results in advance? Like how is that going to work?
Mr. Chair, another excellent question. I mean, one of the things that's very important in the audit process is that that you debrief the auditee on a regular basis, and when you're done, you don't wait to go away and then prepare a report and then provide the information, the results of your findings months afterwards. What you've got to do is, when it's fresh in everyone's minds, provide the auditee with your findings and your recommendations. And then while you're writing up the report, they're already incorporating the findings and the recommendations in their activities. And when they get the report itself, and by the time it comes to council, and when you look at the reports that we're presenting here, a lot of the management comments indicate management is in agreement, and in fact we've already implemented this change.
Thank you, Councillor Aguilar. Councillor Deans.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Hughes, just to answer your question from earlier, I'm certainly willing to accept the offer from the city manager to provide a full accounting of the direct and associated costs of LRT within a month, on the understanding that you will continue to do as you told me previously, which is you would proceed with a full audit in 2017.
What I, through to the chair, through to the councillor, what I will do is I indicated that it was something that could and should be looked at, and I thought that it was something that would be better placed in 2017.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And Mr. Kirkpatrick, just while I have the floor, I just wanted to remind you that I had asked for an independent assessment of Phase 1 back in the spring. There was an assessment done, I think, by KPMG and Boxfish. I've asked several times now for a copy of that, and I haven't gotten it yet. So when could I expect to get that?
Chair, through to Councillor Deans, I actually asked Chris Whale about that earlier this week, and within 1 to 2 weeks you'll have that report.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's the lessons learned report. Yeah.
You're done? Okay, thank you. So if we may, based on what the city clerk provided us as advice on how the work plan should be done, I guess the best way to go forward with this, Mr. Hughes, is just perhaps recap what we asked, if it could be considered. Does that work best for you, since you have control of the work plan?
The proposed areas that we audit are as per the list in the submission, which are the audit of LRT planning and change management, the audit of the emergency preparedness and response for health services, the audit of the regulatory framework for the light rail transit, audit of compliance with legislated ambulance service documentation, audit of the management of the Lansdowne contract, and audit of IT remote access controls.
Right, and nobody on committee wanted to make a recommendation on any one of those audits. What I asked you to look into, just the makeup of the registry, is that something that you would add to the work plan, or is that just a direction to you to work with the people Councillor Deans mentioned to try and come up with what is the makeup of that registry?
I'm going to use, Mr. Chair, I'm going to use the next little while to gather information on what rights we would have to review the registry, but just as important is look to see if anyone has done any work on the auditing of that registry, and that's why checking with the Provincial Auditor General makes sense as well, and I'll report back to committee.
Thank you. Did anybody else have, we're all good? Okay, so then I believe is the recommendation carried then?
Carried.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hughes. So now we move on to the annual report and detailed audit reports. You have a motion, Vice Chair?
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Motion, whereas the supporting documentation titled Office of the Auditor General Annual Report, tabled at the Audit Committee November 26, 2015, and the detailed audit reports were not circulated with the agenda package. Therefore, be it resolved that the Audit Committee approve the addition of these documents for consideration by the committee at today's meeting pursuant to Section 89.3 of the Procedures Bylaw, being Bylaw 2014-441.
Carried?
Yeah.
Carried. Thank you. Mr. Hughes, you have a presentation?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chair. OK. Monsieur le Président, la plupart des vérifications sur l'écran maintenant sont approuvées par la sous-comité de vérification le 13 février 2014 et par le Conseil le 26 mars 2014. The bulk of the audits that you see on those lists, that you see on the screen there, were approved by the Audit Subcommittee on the 13th of February 2014 and by Council on March 26, 2014. I'd like to point out that the Audit of Infrastructure Services Department was approved by the Audit Subcommittee on September 13th and the Council on October 10th. And finally, the audit of the Mackenzie King Bridge resurfacing was actually conducted as a result of a call to the Fraud and Waste Hotline. And it related, because there was litigation related to that contract, that audit was withheld until the end of the litigation recently, and the audit subcommittee was briefed on this report in camera back in 2011, and we are making that public today. So if we could begin with the audit of the 311 contact center. I think everyone knows that there's a significant volume of calls that are received by the 311 contact center. They actually receive more than 500,000 calls and 5,000 emails each year. And Mr. Vice Chair, I can say that based on the direct observation of our auditors, we found that 311 agents were courteous, knowledgeable, and very service-oriented, and that clients are generally satisfied with the service that they receive. The audit did, however, identify opportunities to better support the 311 agents by improving the information in the knowledge database that they rely upon. The knowledge database is actually developed by city staff outside of 311 who are knowledge experts in that area. What we found was that the individuals who were preparing these articles and were responsible for these articles, they weren't aware that they were responsible for these articles, and more importantly, they didn't have knowledge to the database. So as a result, procedures to review articles as scheduled ensure they're up to date weren't working consistently. And of course, the risk, if the knowledge database isn't up to date, is the information that must be relied upon by the agents isn't accurate, and the information that they in turn provide to callers, there's a risk that that could be inaccurate. We also found that the scheduling of the actual agents themselves could be improved for efficiency purposes, and there's a new scheduling system that is in place in the 311 center, and we thought that it could be better used to eliminate a number of unnecessary manual activities that are being conducted by staff. We found that the 311 service standard is the lowest of other municipalities that we compared it to. For example, here at the City of Ottawa, the service standard is 80% of all calls will be answered within 120 seconds. When you compare that to Toronto, they have the same 80% but within 75 seconds. Vancouver, 80% within 30 seconds, the same as Calgary. Edmonton has the most aggressive standard. 80% of their calls will be answered within 25 seconds. The standard that is used here in Ottawa, in addition to being the lowest compared to other municipalities, it actually hasn't been approved by council, and we're suggesting that that's an important service to the public that should be approved by council. When we looked at the semi-annual reporting to council, we felt that the performance report was misleading. For example, abandoned calls are reported as being answered. The thought being that if somebody is waiting on hold and they decide to hang up, that they've decided that they've heard in the recorded messages the answer to that question. And then when we analyzed the wait times, because the average wait time is reported to council, including all the calls that come in over a 24-hour period. We looked at we analyzed the calls for those individuals that were waiting longer than 120 seconds. So 20% of the people, the other side of the 80%, those 20% of the people, 1 in 5 callers, are waiting an average of 8 minutes for their phone to be answered and for their call to be answered. And that's an average from on a 24-hour clock. So you know that in actual fact the average wait for those individuals is between 2 minutes right up to 59 and a half minutes. So when we looked at potential savings within 311, we weren't able to quantify any potential savings, but we did provide recommendations for staff to automate a number of processes that are currently manual. That would obviously create efficiencies in the use of staff, and many of these efficiencies, many of these processes that are being done manually could be done with the systems that are already in existence. The ability is there to automate some of those processes. There were 34 recommendations in the audit report, and management agreed with all of them. L'unité des comptes créateurs de la ville traite plus de 350 000 transactions chaque année et distribue plus de 3 milliards en paiement aux fournisseurs. La vérification a confirmé que bien que la carte de contrôle des comptes créateurs soit adéquate, 20% des factures de fournisseurs examinés ont été payés en retard et 5% n'ont pas permis à la ville de bénéficier d'un rabais à faire. Et selon les rapports des gestionnaires de l'unité de compte créateur, le perte total, c'est à peu près 600 000 $ chaque année. The audit of accounts payable. The city's accounts payable unit processes over 350,000 transactions each year, paying suppliers more than $3 billion. The audit confirmed that although controls over the accounts payable processes are accurate, testing of a sample of vendor invoices found 20% were paid late and 5% did not take advantage of available discounts. And according to a 2014 management report, those discounts missed totaled about $600,000. Most accounts payable transactions go through an automated invoice processing system here at the city known as MarkView, and then through the city's financial system, the SAP. The audit found that while application controls within MarkView and SAP are operating effectively, opportunities exist to increase their use and reduce manual controls. The system also can be configured to search for duplicate payments. I can say that in our work we found a significant number of duplicate payments. It turns out that management was aware of the bulk, all but 3 of those duplicate payments through manual processes, and they had already started to recover those amounts. But certainly aspects of this process can be automated, which would effectively save the use of individual time. As far as potential savings, to take advantage of discounts being offered by vendors, accounts payable needs to make changes to the system to read the receipt date of an invoice rather than accept the date that is actually shown on the face of the invoice. Reporting penalties paid for late payments to city managers would bring to the attention of city managers the fact that perhaps some of the processes that they have in place are inefficient. And if you share that with managers, they would be motivated to look at the processes to improve processing times to minimize the amount of either late payments or discounts that are missed. In the report, there were 7 recommendations, and management agreed with them all. Monsieur le Président, les services d'infrastructure de la Ville assurant la gestion de l'actif lié aux routes, aux trottoirs, aux réseaux d'égouts, aux bâtiments et à d'autres structures. Ils sont également responsables de la conception, de la mise en œuvre, de l'administration des travaux de construction et de réfection d'infrastructures municipales. Nous avons effectué 2 vérifications distinctes des services d'infrastructure, un sur la gestion technique et l'autre sur la gestion administrative. The Infrastructure Services Director is responsible for asset management for the city's roads, sidewalks, sewers, buildings, and other structures. They're responsible for the design and construction of any work required for new construction and the rehabilitation of the city's infrastructure. 2 distinct audits of ISD were conducted, the audit of technical management of ISD and the audit of administrative management of ISD. So turning to the first audit in ISD, the administrative management, we found that there is no budget management for capital expenditures planned for the year. Estimating and managing capital expenditures by year, we felt would assist with cash flow management and improve oversight and control of projects. The operating budget for ISD, depending on the year, for example, between 2010 and 2012, it ranged from $7.1 to $7.6 million. And although it's made up primarily of salaries, wages, and benefits, we found that the current process of quarterly reviews of the operating budget could be improved by moving to monthly reviews of that operating budget. With the exception of an opportunity, next slide. With the exception of an opportunity to automate the paper forms used in some parts of ISD, overtime, sick leave, and vacation were generally found to be well managed. There were 9 recommendations in the audit report, and management agreed with them all. Turning to the technical management of ISD, at the time of the audit, we found that there were project management and construction inspection processes in place that you would expect to see for an operation conducting the amount of work that is done by the Infrastructure Services Department. However, a review of a sample of project files found that those processes are not consistently applied. The specific areas requiring further attention are project schedules, budget control, communications, quality assurance, and project reviews. In addition, there are issues which we had identified in previous audits, namely the responsibility for redesign costs, the recovery of change orders due to errors, exercising of contract liquidated damages, and project oversight. Pour des économies potentielles, les contrats de services techniques coûtent entre 7 à 10 millions de dollars chaque année. Selon nous, la modification des procédures ou des modalités de contrat pour réduire les tarifs de 10% permettra d'économiser de 350 000 dollars annuellement. As far as potential savings in the coming out of the technical audit, in our opinion, looking at the engineering service contracts that are in the range of $7 to $10 million annually, modifications to procedures or contract terms for those projects exceeding $150,000, requiring a reduction of 10% of the rates would deliver savings of about $350,000 annually. Further, if the department considered using more in-house construction inspectors, additional amounts could be saved. There were 8 recommendations in the report, and management agreed with all of them. The audit of the committee will recall that last year we put on the audit plan an audit of IT, and we actually conducted 2 audits within IT. The first was an audit of IT risk management, and the other one we'll be discussing in camera. So when you consider that an organization of the complexity and size of the City of Ottawa, the depth of potential IT-related risks is quite significant. There's an inherent IT risk in nearly every city activity or function because we're so dependent on information technology in the way that we operate. Based on our review, we've determined that there's a low maturity level of most city departments for IT risk management, and this is primarily due to governance and leadership issues. The city is yet to develop a comprehensive governance component of an information technology risk management framework, including clear and consistent responsibilities and accountabilities for city executives and management. Now, while the city does have some components of an effective IT risk management framework within our enterprise risk management program, there's no standalone IT risk management framework, and we think that's required for an entity the size of the City of Ottawa. Without the recommended development of the framework, which would include the roles and responsibilities, accountabilities, funding model, and policy suite, the potential vulnerability of our risks in relation to information technology could have significant impact on city operations. There are other factors which we found contribute to the low maturity level or the effective management of IT risks, and that is that the governance around the governance structures and the practices around the funding of IT projects was problematic, in the sense that we're not ensuring that IT projects which may result in a significant risk are addressed first. The decentralized approach used to fund IT projects and the absence of a citywide priority ranking system impacts the effectiveness of the city IT management team. And that means that because of this, decisions made regarding IT investments or expenditures, they may not always be aligned with overall corporate priorities and our risk management objectives. We also found that the reporting structure to and from the Chief Information Officer is not consistent with best practices. Leading practices would put IT risk guidance and leading practices for IT risk indicate that the CIO position should be responsible for all citywide processes, including risk governance, risk evaluation, and risk response, and all subordinate IT management roles should report to the CIO. We found that procedures and guidance at both the corporate and department levels are not sufficient to ensure that the identification, evaluation, communication, mitigation, and monitoring of the most important IT risks is consistent, appropriate, and timely. In addition, there was no assurance that IT issues of high priorities critical to citywide objectives would be brought to corporate attention. In some business units, people who have little or no technical training are being tasked under the Enterprise Risk Management Framework with the identification of risks and or related mitigation strategies. As a result, there are gaps and weaknesses in the identification, assessment, and mitigation of critical IT risks. Further, we found no risk register across the city. Selon nous, dans le domaine des économies potentielles, dans le domaine des risques liés aux technologies informatiques, bien qu'il soit impossible de mesurer leur effet, nous croyons que la mise en œuvre de ces recommandations augmentera l'efficacité opérationnelle globale de façon suivante. Par exemple, l'amélioration de l'orientation des conseils et de la reddition de comptes en matière de technologie informatique dans tous les services, ce qui permettra de réaliser des économies d'échelle et de rendre plus efficace la prise de décisions relativement au risque dans le monde de technologie informatique. Mais nous devons dire que, malgré ces économies potentielles, il est à noter que les changements requis pour renouveler les infrastructures de la ville et améliorer la protection contre les risques liés au TI nécessiteront des investissements considérables au cours de les prochaines années. We found, as far as potential savings were concerned in IT risk management, we felt that improved direction and reporting activities on a citywide basis would lead to economies of scale and better decision-making for information management, information technology-related decisions before they were made. Improved identification, assessment, and mitigation initiatives will protect the city against potential system failures or security breaches, including cyber attacks. Notwithstanding these potential savings, it must be noted that necessary changes to upgrade or replace the city's infrastructure and to adequately increase the city's IT security protection will require significant investment in coming years. There were 8 recommendations in the report, and management agreed to all of them. As I mentioned earlier, the audit of the Mackenzie King Bridge resurfacing came out of a call to the Fraud and Waste Hotline in 2010. This report was actually presented to the committee in camera in 2011, and because of litigation, we weren't able to make it public until now. So the Mackenzie, just to point out, to remind the members of the committee, the Mackenzie King Bridge is part of the OC Transpo Transitway system, and it's also part of the NAC parking garage where leakage had been a chronic problem. These factors created onerous conditions on the pavement, and the city has had to mill and repave portions of the bridge annually. A 2004 study of options for pavement rehabilitation concluded that the most economical solution was annual pavement repairs for 30 years, milling and repaving the entire surface every 15 years, and replace the waterproofing and asphalt every 30 years. By 2007, staff worked to find a different approach. It was decided to remove the waterproofing and asphalt and repave using a new product. It was a modified hot mix asphalt. The total cost of removing the waterproofing for the entire length of the bridge and repaving using this solution was over $600,000 in 2008. However, there were issues with the product, and in 2009 it was necessary to remove that new product that had been installed, and they had to repave using conditional waterproofing and asphalt on the entire bridge at a cost of another $700,000. That included about $100,000 in structural bridge work that was done at the same time. Now, a portion of that total cost of the 2008 and 2009 work could have been avoided if the city had continued with the program of milling and repaving only those sections of the bridge that required paving in accordance with the plan that had been developed in 2004. We found that the decision to repave using this new product was made without proper design and testing and without following the alternative evaluation methods that were formalized in the guidelines for structure renewal. In this report, there were 38 findings and 11 recommendations, and management was in agreement with all of them. Dans le rapport, dans la vérification de la réfection du pont Mackenzie King, il était 38 conclusions ont été formulées et la direction est d'accord avec les 8 recommandations. Monsieur le Président, en Ontario, les espèces en péril sont protégées par les lois provinciales ou fédérales que la Ville doit respecter. La vérification a permis de conclure qu'en général, la Ville comprend bien les exigences de la réglementation et le service de l'urbanisme et de la gestion de la croissance à rédiger des protocoles et des documents officiels qui guident les activités de la Ville. Turning to the audit of species at risk, in Ontario, species at risk are protected either at the provincial or the federal level, and the city must ensure compliance with these regulations. The audit found that overall the city has a good understanding of the requirements to comply with those regulations, and that the PGM department has produced protocols and official documents to guide city operations. The audit found, however, that operational improvements are required. The mitigation measures that are followed by the Public Works Department are not specific enough for the maintenance activities it undertakes. As well, for major infrastructure projects, there's no protocol to review the environmental and legislative context before starting the work on site. The audit found that the city has an excellent up-to-date list of species at risk in the Ottawa area, but it isn't available to all staff members to deal with such species. In our view, the potential savings for management of species at risk are minimal. There were 8 recommendations in the report, and staff agreed with all of them. Turning to the audit of winter operations, capacity planning, and performance measurement. The Public Works Department maintains the city's roads and pathways in the winter by providing snow removal and ice control services. In 2013, the City of Ottawa's annual budget for winter operations was $55.3 million. The 2013 expenditures were $79.2 million. The City Council approved maintenance quality standards for snow and ice control in May of 2003. Overall, our maintenance quality standards are higher than provincial minimum maintenance standards. Use of these higher standards improves service, but at an increased cost. We found that the maintenance quality standards have not been systematically reviewed or assessed for financial impact since they were set. So in summary, we've got a service standard that is higher than the provincial standard, and we don't know what the cost differential is between the standard that is approved by council and the provincial minimum standard. The city also has a high ratio of owned to contracted equipment when compared against other large Ontario municipalities. We found that the city has not conducted a full analysis to determine the optimum mix of internal and external services to achieve the highest level of economy and efficiency for the services. That means of course, there's a risk that city staff are spending time on tasks that could be available commercially at a lower cost. Des économies potentielles. Notre analyse des différentes activités montre des économies potentielles. La demande pour les divers services n'a pas été quantifiée, ce qui indique que certaines activités non nécessaires pourront très certainement être éliminées pour réduire les coûts. Potential savings, we found that there may be opportunities for the city to look for savings in a couple of areas. For example, there's a significant, about 25% of the time, there's miscellaneous activities that is done by staff during winter operations. The actual work that is required hasn't been quantified, and which means they haven't clearly demonstrated the need for that. They haven't clearly demonstrated that there is a need for that work to be done. In our view, you should demonstrate the need and the legitimacy, and then you have an opportunity to look at whether or not those activities could be done internally or externally. Other potential savings could be achieved through a review of changes to the current maintenance quality standards. We could consider bringing them in line to provincial standards, or looking at the cost differential between what we're doing today versus the provincial minimum standards, and looking for something between where we are today and the provincial minimum. But we can only that can only be done once you know the cost of that additional service. Further, we felt that better controls over receipt and use of materials could deliver some small savings as well. All in all, the report had 20 recommendations, and management was in agreement. Management was in agreement with all 20 of the findings of the recommendations. Mr. Chair, if you go through those, all of those reports, there are some common themes that emerge. And the first is that there's a lack of financial analysis sometimes when decisions are being made. And we say that, for example, in 311, there are 3 different types of resources: full-time, part-time, and casual. And there's no data or analysis for coming up with the optimum mix of those resources with various, analyzing various scenarios, coming up with different capacities. There was no data on a cost per call, or a cost for to answer an email, or cost for looking at other service levels beyond the current one that we're carrying out. In winter operations, we found that no financial analysis has been done on the optimal mix of internal versus external resources, or the cost to keep standards above, as I've just finished saying, to keep the standards above the provincial minimum standards. The second theme was that efficiencies are not totally realized or evaluated when new technology is implemented. We found a number of systems where there were options that were purchased in solutions that were brought in to solve certain issues, but certain options weren't being used, and activities were being carried on by staff manually. So, for example, there was a workforce management tool within 311, and yet staff were still performing manual activities that the tool could eliminate. We found within accounts payable, for example, that there was a tool that would look for or eliminate duplicate payments, and staff are doing that manually. In winter ops, in winter operations, we found that certainly winter operations has done a good job of adopting technology to deliver their service, but they haven't conducted an analysis to determine whether the benefits that were intended from those investments were actually realized. So going forward, Mr. Chair, we will continue to report annually on our audit reports that we complete during the year. We'll follow up our audits throughout the year, and we will present them to the audit committee as we complete them. And the fraud and waste hotline report will be presented annually, likely somewhere around the end of Q2. Finally, Mr. Chair, I would like to express our appreciation for the continued cooperation and assistance that come from the city manager and staff, and going to the point that was raised by Councillor Blais, it really is important that when we do our work, knowing full well that the people that we're auditing already have a full-time job, it's important that we minimize our impact on their operations. And I'd like to think that we do that. And so I'd like to thank the cooperation of staff. And then I'd like to introduce the staff of the Office of the Auditor General. And they're sitting up behind me. If you wouldn't mind standing up. We've got one person who's missing. She's at home auditing the activities of a young one less than a year old. So, thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hughes, and thank you to your staff for that very good report. Mr. Kirkpatrick, you'd like to make comments, please?
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ken. I'd like to start by acknowledging that the city's management team and the Auditor General's staff acknowledge all of their hard work reviewing the areas that are the subject of the AG's 2014 annual report that's in front of the committee today. As in previous years, city management has worked in partnership with the Auditor General's office through the various audit phases to develop audit reports and management responses that will enable efficient implementations of audit recommendations. Je suis fier d'affirmer que cette collaboration s'est traduite par une entente sur les 116 recommandations formulées par le vérificateur général dans le rapport annuel 2014. A number of the recommendations being tabled today have already been implemented or are underway, and work plans have been developed to implement others. In the area of accounts payable, the audit confirmed that there is a management control framework in place, and controls have been designed to enable the payment of accurate and approved vendor invoices. It did identify opportunities for improvements in the consistency or automation of some controls. With the implementation of MarkView, accounts payable has begun a move to automated processing and continues to consider automation when evaluating solutions to improve operations, performance results, and monitoring. The realization of discount opportunities improved significantly this year by implementing the modules included in the MarkView upgrade that the Auditor General referred to. With respect to winter operations, many of the Auditor General's recommendations regarding the optimal mix of internal and contracted services, service standards, and salt management practices will be addressed as part of the roads, service, winter operations, and KPMG review that's being undertaken right now in Public Works. This report, including subsequent recommendations, will be presented to the Transportation Committee and Council in the second quarter of next year. I would highlight that, in fact, some of the benefits from this review we have already incorporated into the Table 2016 budget for Council's consideration in the amount of $2.5 million. In reference to the 311 Contact Center, while clients are satisfied overall with the service they receive, the audit did identify some opportunities for improvement with regard to workforce management, further streamlining of processes and systems, and more robust reporting to management and council. Implementation of the audit's recommendations will result in a more responsive and transparent 311 service. And Service Ottawa is in the process of undertaking a full business case that will identify opportunities for improved service and efficiencies by the end of 2016 that will be considered and presented to Council in the 2017 budget. That's Sue Jones. In the area of IT risk management, the audit recommends the development of a robust IT risk management framework that includes a governance component that will clearly define roles, responsibilities, and authorities for city management. To that end, work will be done over the coming months to strengthen and confirm the role, responsibilities, and accountabilities of the Director of IT and Chief Information Officer. Steps will also be taken to strengthen the effective authority of the corporate IT management team, and a suite of supporting policy and procedures will also be developed in conjunction with the enhancement of the IT risk management framework as recommended by the Auditor General. As Council is aware, necessary changes to upgrade, replace the city's infrastructure, and to adequately increase the city's IT security protection will require investment in the coming years. Estimates will be developed and considered as part of the budget priorities for 2017. All of these IT-related matters are current matters on the agenda of both the Executive and Senior Management Committees, and they serve as a high-priority focus of management at the current time. I have a lot of confidence in the leadership capabilities of the city's new CIO, Charles Duffett, as does his organization, as the audit identified. And Charles will be presenting his assessment and recommended change plan to the Executive Senior Management Committee in the coming month. With regard to the Infrastructure Services Administrative and Technical Audits, the audits indicate that the City's Infrastructure Services Department has the project management and construction inspection processes in place to deliver the services required. As a result of the audit, some changes and initiatives are underway to improve project scheduling, budget control and reporting, communications, quality assurance, management of change orders, and project oversight. The City is also implementing measures that will better assess consultant performance. Many of these initiatives are part of the integrated management program of change that started over a year ago in the Infrastructure Services Department and will continue for the next 2 years. The audit related to species at risk confirmed that the City has developed protocols and guidelines related to work potentially impacting species at risk and their natural habitats to facilitate compliance with provincial and federal legislation. Management will be developing an approach to review the environmental context and appropriate regulations for major infrastructure projects prior to commencement of these projects to ensure legislative compliance regarding the protection of species at risk and their habitats. In addition, Public Works will be strengthening best management practices for road maintenance, parks, buildings, and forestry activities, covering both sensitive and non-sensitive areas. Lastly, with regard to the audit of the Mackenzie King Bridge rehabilitation, all of the recommendations that were made by the Auditor General's Office in 2010 have now been implemented. Requirements to be followed while piloting new technologies have been fully documented in the Infrastructure Services Department's Project Delivery Manual. In addition, specific guidance regarding when to engage outside experts has been incorporated into the City's procedures. As the Committee knows, this project resulted in litigation, and the legal matter has been settled through a confidential mediation process, and recoveries were realized as part of this process. J'aimerais conclure en réitérant que la direction a accepté toutes les recommandations formulées aujourd'hui par le vérificateur général. The audits confirm that the City's partnership with the Office of the Auditor General continues to result in the strengthening of management practices and the advancement of service excellence. We are committed to finding better ways to monitor, measure, and assess the work we do in order to improve overall performance, streamline operations, and deliver value to residents. Merci, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kirkpatrick. So I believe, do we go to the motion or right to questions? No. We're okay to go right to questions? Okay. Councillor DeRouche was first, then Councillor Wilkinson, and Councillor Aglai.
I have a few questions, and thank you very much, Mr. Hugh, for preparing this great report, actually. I have a few, I agree with the recommendation on the 311 audit. This, which state the caller they've been asked to have a consent to be their information transferred to the Councillor's office. I know we really right now receive emails from the resident that they email us, but when people call 311, the Councillor's office doesn't doesn't get this information. And this is, I think, for councillors, probably this is very important piece of information, so they know what the residents are really inquiring and most issue that's happening in their ward. So I want to touch base on that one because that's really important, and we'd like to have a follow-up on that. I think this is these information should come to the councillor's office from when the resident called the 311 to be able to notify the councillor's offices. That's for now.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Drews. Councillor Wilkinson?
Mr. through you to the council, I believe it's a privacy issue, and I think staff would probably be able to answer that, but I think that's part of the issue, is they must ask for consent in order to provide it to your office.
Yeah, perhaps if Ms. Gray could come down, and while she's making her way here, I believe residents check a box if they agree to have it passed on, so I think the privacy piece is done.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've worked with legal services around the consent requirements to provide specific information to councillors around ward-specific inquiries, and it is a requirement that the recipient or the citizen give it permission for that councillor to have access to that information. And once they've given us that permission, those requests get forwarded in the daily consent report to councillors so that they can follow up on those service requests.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. Is that okay, Councillor Drews? Okay. Councillor Wilkinson?
Thank you. I had that similar question, but I thought in the report you were suggesting that we not do that anymore, that we only go and use the open data. And the open data does not give us the contact information that the residents are providing with that consent. Am I reading that right, Ken?
Yeah, the information that you still would not get the contact information, but at least you would have access to.
But the contact information is very important to us because that's how we get in contact. And right now we're getting that when they give consent. And I would not want to see that end because we use that in our office, and I think others as well. But it only comes with consent. I happened to spend an hour at the 311 call center with one to get an idea, and they had to get permission on every call that I was there, but you could see how they actually do it. And when it's specifically in our area, it gives us, especially for new residents, it's one way that we can know that they exist, because they're always asking for blue boxes and things like that, and we get a lot from that consent report. That's just something, Mr. Administration, I would not like to see that ending, even though you've suggested it. And the other thing on the 311 one is the dealing with the emails. 311 keeps telling people to phone them, and yet a lot of people would prefer to do emails because then they don't have to wait. And what the report is showing, is something I've known about, is that they don't get priority in getting responded to. And if there's people on night shift when it's not busy, then I think that it's helpful, because you commented that they often don't deal with emails at night, that we could get a faster response. And I think it would end up freeing up people waiting for calls in the middle of the day when it's busy if they have that ability more. So I guess that's more of yours in managing it. But are you going to be moving in that direction? Because they certainly suggested in the report.
Yes, as you know, through Mr. Chair, we've made a significant investment in technologies to try to move people to online services rather than use email. But we recognize there's still about a small percentage, about 1% of people still want to use email, and we need to improve that channel. So we're just in the process of hiring an additional staff, and based on the recommendations of the audit, who would now do the evening shift, and will take the email response times to try and improve that response time in terms of what we put as public to the...
But it was actually suggested that in the middle of the night when it's not busy, they could do that without adding another staff, and I would think that would be more appropriate to do if we're not trying to add cost to the city, at least I don't, if we can do it with existing staff. And some, with the electronic one is fine, but some things aren't on that electronic list left, and those people still have to contact. And most people prefer to use email these days. I don't get very many phone calls coming to my office. They all use emails.
Just as a point of clarification, it is within existing resources. It's just a reallocation of our current resources to get the most efficient use of those resources.
Okay, thank you. But that's on the IT. Then on the On IT, I'm on the IT committee, and I've had a number of meetings discussing how to move forward with our new IT head, who's a breath of fresh air in this organization, how he wants to go. But I'm reading into what you're saying with the change in the organization, and with what the city manager said as well, that what he's been talking to the committee about changing the way in which the reporting is done on IT and consolidating the management system, even if they're decentralized employees, that you actually know what everybody's doing in IT, is what you're planning to have going to your committee now to get moving forward, because I think that's really important if we're going to be able to deal with this risk.
That's correct, Chair.
Okay. I just wanted to let colleagues know there is real action starting to happen that way, including more efficient ways of deciding what we get in IT. The point is that some staff can't go and say, we want this particular program now. They have to say, we want to achieve this objective, this is the answers we need, what's the best way of doing it. And it's going to make, I think, our whole IT system a lot more efficient and reduce the number of programs they're maintaining, which is almost 300, down to a more meaningful number. So I think we've got in here feeds right into that, and I thank you for that information. Then there's the bridge and the repaving. I couldn't believe it when I saw that the person who was on staff and said we should do this to technology then left and then was hired by the city to evaluate what happened with the new technology. I don't know who's going to explain that one, but it doesn't make sense that the person who did something that's having a problem is the person who evaluates what the problem was. And you've made that pretty clear in what you've written there. And I guess that was part of all the litigation, but we can't get into too much. Is that? Okay, then I just want, has there been a change in management now that won't happen again?
Perhaps Mr. Gotcha would like to come down and answer that?
There's Wayne's right beside Ellen.
Or sorry, Mr. Newell, I didn't see you there. If either one.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, as a result of certainly those occurrences, there's definitely additional management oversight that's being provided. There's also additional processes that are in place so that before we actually proceed with new technologies, that it's gone through proper oversight and reviews before we actually proceed to implementation.
So this was an important learning exercise, was it?
On many fronts, but it's also the area where we try to push in terms of looking at innovative solutions and always trying to look at better ways of maintaining our infrastructure, and obviously this is an area where basically a bit more oversight and reviews would have been beneficial to the process.
I think upfront planning as opposed to looking at it afterward. This, I think, Mr. Kirkpatrick, does not only apply in infrastructure, this could apply in any kind of project throughout the city. So there should be a general policy in all departments that this is, and is that happening now? I know it's hard in a big organization, but we really need to do it.
Yes, and related to previous audits, the management control framework, the audit of the airport Parkway pedestrian bridge, we've been spending a lot of time over the last year rolling out improved project governance structures, including project mandates, the description of the entire project, identification of risks, very clear identification of roles and responsibilities within a project. And part of that is also business case evaluation of project of alternatives. So in my opinion, I believe we're making very serious and significant improvements in our project management methodology.
I'm not sure you covered this as to use in doing your report. One of the things I've found in talking to staff about projects in my own area is that different people are involved at different times of it, and they don't always talk to each other. So if planning people decide this road has to get built, and they send it over here to get the design done, but the design people can't move forward until the planning people say to move forward, and they get the budgets done over there. And there's an integration that's needed. Was that part of what you looked at in this particular one, and is something that they could, because I think it's still happening.
That wasn't specifically looked at, Mr. Chair, in our audit, and it isn't specifically looked at in the one that we're currently conducting. But I think in response to the previous audit that was done, the one that we've just presented today, and the I believe DeVry's report on the Airport Pedestrian Parkway Bridge, I know that staff has come up with a comprehensive change to the way they're planning the projects. We haven't looked at it, but I know that when we come in to do our follow-up to this audit and the prior audit, we would look at it, and you'd have to ask staff if they would.
I think it's not just an individual ones which they're tending to look at. It's a systematic thing that needs to be looked at a bit more, and that's when we get the new city manager in, rather than you having to take it over now. I mean, to let you know, I know of some things still happening in that regard. And finally, species at risk is one of my more favorite or non-favorite topics. I'm not quite sure because I have a lot of them in my ward. And I look at what you've done here. You've talked about how the city staff work with the species at risk. But the species at risk, the planning department is approving plans and things and development going on where there are species at risk and in fact endangered species that are on the endangered species list. We've done a wildlife protocol, but we haven't yet said how we're going to implement that with people who are doing development. So I only saw in here that you're really looking at the staff component, making sure they all know about it. Is part of that how we get outside agencies who are doing things that are going to kill the animals if we don't do it right, frankly, making sure that they follow the wildlife protocol, which has been approved by council now, but we haven't got a firm way in how you're implementing it. The protocol's there, but the implementation seems to be a bit weak.
Mr. Chair, that's correct. We didn't specifically look at the liaison with the external parties, but the findings and the recommendations the findings would be the same, and the recommendations would still benefit the external community. If the city is doing a good job in coming up with this list, but people in different parts of the city who need access to that list don't have access to that list, well, then that would apply equally to developers or anyone outside the city. So solving that problem, certainly staff.
We do have the wildlife protocol for construction there now, which should apply to both city and not city, but it's how you get them to actually do it that I'm concerned about. And you didn't actually look at that aspect of it very much.
No, Mr. Chair, we did not.
So it's something that perhaps
Thank you
implementation in future when you do your follow-up on it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. Councillor Eglai, and then Councillor El Shantiri, and then Vice Chair Kuche.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My question's around 311, and I thought I had misheard you during your presentation that abandoned calls were treated as successful calls, but now that I've got the hard copy, I see that's actually the case. I think you're being very generous in your comments saying that this is potentially misleading as to the results. And maybe you should be sitting in one of our chairs for your political acumen, because I've raised this issue with staff before, and never can I recollect getting an explanation like this as to why service levels don't seem to match what we're hearing from our actual residents who aren't getting through. So thank you for that clarification. Now, calls in excess of 120 seconds that have not been answered, what happens to those?
The same thing would happen. If they are abandoned, they are treated as answered.
So I see Donna Gray shaking her head up in the audience, so maybe she should come down and answer that question. Because we've all received comments and emails from residents saying I was on hold for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, what have you, which...
Mr. Chair, I stand corrected. There's no data reported on calls greater than 120 seconds. We looked in the audit, we looked at the calls greater than 120 seconds. And it was that analysis that determined that if you're part of that 20%, the standard is 80% within 120 seconds. If you're part of that 20%, what does that mean to you? We looked at those people that were waiting longer than 120 seconds, so 1 in 5 callers, and what that meant was you were waiting anywhere from 2 minutes to 59 minutes, and the average was 8 plus minutes.
So, but you're saying that that information didn't feed in to the satisfaction results that we were given on a regular basis as to how well the system was doing?
It does not. It's not reported in the performance criteria. We think that there was additional criteria that could be provided to councillors. I mean, we have a standard, and based on this standard, these are the results. And then that would allow council to say, we have to change our standard, or we're okay with that standard. But we have to provide more information, in our opinion.
Now, in your audit process, were you able to find the genesis for this decision as to simply not reporting it, or were you able to find other municipalities with similar services that follow that practice?
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure specifically what practice you're referring to.
The practice of calling or categorizing unanswered phone calls as being a satisfactory response.
There are some municipalities that include an abandoned call within the first 100, whatever their service standard is, as a successful answered call. So it's not exclusively, the City of Ottawa is not the only one that's doing this. There are other municipalities that are doing it, but the theory behind
Have they been audited yet on their practices?
They would be outside of our jurisdiction. So.
And so I take it as a result of the audit, we're not going to be doing that anymore.
So just on a point of clarification, so it is a practice in municipalities and call centers to include abandoned calls in the first, whatever your service level is. And the rationale, the intent is not that the person has answered the call or that they got what they wanted, but it's really that the service has no way to determine whether somebody just miscalled and hung up. So it's only included in the first piece of your service level. If it happens after your service level, we do include abandoned calls in that to say if we haven't answered your call in the first 120 seconds, which is our commitment to the resident, we take that as we have not met our commitment to the resident. So when we look at service level and we look at how much, what percentage, 91% of calls are within service level up until the 5-minute mark, which is recognized in the audit.
I'm just going to break in here for a second, because that's not what I heard Mr. Hughes say. I thought Mr. Hughes said that the calls longer than 120 seconds that had not been answered didn't factor into your satisfaction survey. Did I miss that?
You're not reporting the calls that are abandoned after 120 seconds. That's correct. They're not treated as answered calls.
That's correct. Calls that are abandoned after the service level of 120 seconds are considered not answered, and they are included in our not answered calls within service level. They are included.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that clarification. So back to the unanswered calls within our service level. Are we going to do something different now? Because you and I have had this discussion, and that's never come up as an explanation as to why people can have frustrations with the system and how long they're waiting.
So there are two options, and we'll come forward in terms of the industry and how people do that. The one option is you include them, which is what we're doing right now. The other option is you take abandoned calls out completely, and you report abandoned calls before service level and after service level, so you have an understanding of what's the impact on your service. If we were to take abandoned calls out of the numerator and the denominator and take them out completely, our service level response would actually be higher in this particular instance in the period of time that we actually looked at. If we took them out completely, we said we're not looking at them before and we're not looking at them after, and we want to have an understanding what that service level actually means. And I think really as we move forward, a better option might be just to look at abandoned calls and when are people abandoning and why, if we can find out some rationale as to why, and look at what kinds of efficiencies and improvements we can do, and we're prepared to do that as a recommendation of the audit.
No, I appreciate that. What number now are we looking at? So what number that is currently fed into our system as a satisfactory call is actually an abandoned call? What percentage of that? of total calls.
Mr. Chair, if I could, to explain something that Ms. Gray said, she's absolutely right. Whether you include the abandoned calls as an answered call or not, or take it out, because you're going to take it out of the numerator and the denominator at the same time, it doesn't significantly change the answer for whether you met your service level or not. In our opinion, what we think should be reported is, as Ms. Gray has said, that she's going to be moving to, report the number of abandoned calls, because we think that's important information.
I agree.
Yeah, it doesn't change, if you include them or exclude them, because we did the numbers as well, it doesn't really change your achievement of the service standard, but we just think it's relevant information that should be reported.
Okay. Next is really a comment in terms of the emails. You talked about efficiencies in terms of the emails. One of the things, and I don't know if my colleagues have received this as well, is a standard form email goes out to people on the system saying we've got your request, we've got your complaint, and we'll address it within so many days. Often the problem's already been fixed by the time that email goes out. So I get two streams of comments from residents. One is, why are we wasting money sending out an email when the problem's already been fixed? Or why have I had to wait several days to get an email confirming that I put in a request? And this is something that I've mentioned to the city manager as well. I don't understand why there isn't an automatic email sent out either when the phone call comes in or when the email request is sent in saying simply we've received your question, complaint, we've assigned a file number, and we're on it. Like if someone goes on vacation, you get a bounce back email automatic. I don't understand why there's that time lag in there, and why we can't let people know that we're on it already. Because my understanding is, in practice, when the call comes in, a file is opened. Almost, well, not immediately, but very shortly thereafter. But the emails that we send out don't leave that impression. It leaves the impression that this call has somewhat been languishing for some time before someone's turned their attention to it. Or alternatively, as I say, people say, well, that was fixed 2 days ago, so why are you only telling me now a file's been opened? So are we going to be looking at that process as well and making it a little bit more, for lack of a better term, customer friendly?
Mr. Chair, so the challenge that we have with emails right now, with our current technology that we have, is that they are come into our system in a different technology. And often what will happen is a resident will email us, but they may actually call us, or they may call a specific staff person. We might get the service request in multiple places. When they come in through 311 on the phone, they're logged, they're registered, and a notification goes out to the resident at the time the service request is taken, stating that here's their service request number, and they can expect a response time. The email...
And what's the lag time on that? Because that doesn't happen
That's instantaneous with the phone call, as the agent has actually taken the phone call. So when they complete it, it's part of the completion process. Once the form goes, the email goes out to the resident if it has actually come through 311.
So the time lag is on the email request then?
The time lag is on the email request, and that is because we get thousands of emails that have to be triaged, and that process right now, as the auditor acknowledged, is very manual intensive. We're looking at a system upgrade, and we're really hoping to bring email into our channel, our technology, so that we can use that to its full extent.
But in the interim, I mean, if I go on vacation, if I'm away, I just hit a button and it will send an automatic response saying I'm away right now and you can contact so-and-so. It's instantaneous when the email comes in. So can we not create or jerry-rig something until you get your update simply saying, dear resident, we've received your complaint, we've opened a file, or we're investigating it, or whatever, just to let people know that we've heard them and that we're doing something? Like, how hard can that be?
Point of clarification, they do get an email that we've actually received their email. It's not until we've actually processed it that we give them the service we give them the service request number, that it's actually been processed. So they do get something that says the city's actually received the email, and it's not until we actually process it, which is...
So what's the processing time then?
The processing time is the 5 days.
So that's what you're going to attempt to fix. So after the 5 days, you get a second email saying this is your service request number.
Exactly.
Whereas if I call you, I get that automatically with the service number on it.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, I'm still confused as why one takes so much longer than the other.
When we're on the phone, we use a script that gives us specific information that the resident needs to provide to satisfy what the departments need in the back end to fulfill the service request. When we get an email, it could be sometimes pages long, or it could be multiple text in the email. The agents have to interpret that. Sometimes they have to call the constituent to actually figure out the location or additional details. We're roughly taking, on average, I think about 8 minutes to process an email, so it's very labor intensive, and we often do not have the required information to be able to process that in a period of time for that resident. So there is back and forth. What the online service provides to the resident is a real script of answer these 5, 6 questions, and that's what's going to get you the proper response time in the back end. That's why we've been really trying to push people to use our online services versus email. But we know we can't get rid of it completely. We just have to look for an automated solution. But the number of people doing emails right now is still very small. It's less than 1% of people that actually contact the city do so via email. We recognize we have to improve that channel, but it's a costly process for the city for that process.
Last question. So if it's that small percentage, if it's 1%, and I'll call the auditor in on this as well, is it cost effective to be bringing in some sort of an upgrade to deal with that, or we simply go cold turkey and say we don't do email anymore? Because if you can access email, then you can access our online service. So does it make monetary sense? Does it make fiscal sense to upgrade to respond to 1% if that's all it is? Or do we simply say to people, as of this date, we don't take emails anymore and you must do it online?
I assume the question was directed to me, Mr. Chair. We would certainly recommend that you do a business case, but actually in the report we recommended that we found that there was spare capacity overnight and in the evenings, and we suggested that that spare capacity be used to answer some of these emails. Certainly some emails are complicated and might require some research, but certainly some of them the answer can be found within either the knowledge database or the knowledge of the operator, and we believe that some of that could be taken up by the excess capacity in the off hours and overnight.
Very, very quick follow-up. I want clarification, though. You're saying use unused resources over the evening or over the night, and I thought what you said, Ms. Gray, was you were looking at a service upgrade to the technology to respond to the emails, and that's what I raised the issue whether that made cost sense. I understand we're already paying staff. I get that part, but investing in new IT for less than 1%, that's the question I'm asking, Mr. Chief. Does that make sense? And you'll probably tell me you need a business case, but that's the question.
Mr. Chair, to be consistent, and it was one of the common themes that we found in a couple of this audits. Before taking a decision, what we're suggesting is figure out what the costs are of the different alternatives and go with the most economical one.
Councillor, I'd like, can we, after she responds, if you don't mind, your way over your five, so if we can go to...
Just as a point of clarification, so when we talk about new technology, we have to do an upgrade to our current technology. We put the requirements of what we would need with no additional cost into that upgrade to see if there's an opportunity to do that. But I agree, we would not be looking at this point in time in an investment for that degree of service request.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Elson-Terry. If I may, just before you ask your question, what we're looking at, I think everybody in the room realizes we have an in-camera portion to this report that we're going to do. What I hope to do is if we can get to the end of the questions on the report, then if committee agrees, we'll take a half-hour break to refresh and then come back and go directly in camera. Does committee agree? Okay, thank you. Councillor El-Shantiri, and then it'll be Councillor Cloutier.
Well, don't leave, Donna. First of all, I want to thank Councillor Egbai for some of the question that I feel like been old on council, because I'm so happy with the progress we did with 311. We went from somebody calling 311 and the operator said, you're not in the city of Ottawa, and that was West Carleton, to where we are today. So we come a long way with what we have. Some of the email, I think councillors also need to take responsibility. We sent email to 311 sometime because we get the call, because the resident don't have the patient, so they call us and we pick up the call and then we send it to you via email. So I just want to clarify, I mean, we're satisfied to the level we are receiving, and the follow-up, it's coming back to our office as well. So I just want to point that out. We hear the positive feedback. At least, thank God, the city of Ottawa doesn't contract offshore to some do, like banking or Bell Canada or other, when you call and you get overseas respondent to your problem with the TV. So I have to say that, clarify. I think we come a long way. I just glimpsed through the report. Yes, we can do better, and I'm hoping you will do better. But I just want to say we came a long way from where we were before. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Hughes, on slide number 9, and you talk about potential saving, and I couldn't help it, in the past we have asked the same department, if my memory served me well, to do their best to reduce on in-house inspector, because sometimes they find it to contract out inspector will be cost saving. And I think in one of the early days when we audited this, we had asked to go more on the out contract this service. But now you're saying it's costing us more because we need to do more in-house construction. Is that what you implying?
Mr. Chair, I think that what we're saying is, if you're talking about routine, regular inspection, it is less expensive if you're able to have an employee do routine, regular inspections, rather than hire somebody else where there's also a profit included in that in that cost model. But once again, you have to sit down and figure out which is the most economical approach, and that has to be done. What's it costing us now versus what could it cost us if we were to change to another model or a modified model?
Because in the past, Mr. Hughes, some of the area inspection, perhaps like septic system, so we didn't have the expertise on staff, so we contract out to the Rideau Valley Conservation for cost saving, and the business case show quite a bit of cost saving because they have the expertise, we don't, and this is not someone you can hold in the office just to get a call for inspection. So I like to, instead of going blanket, to have an idea, like maybe a business case should be in review where we need the inspector should be in-house, we should hire in-house where it's more cost effective, go out, to a consultant or someone like Rideau Valley who already have inspector in place?
Mr. Chair, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think there are certainly instances where it makes more sense to look at contracting out a service like that if it's a specialty. But here we're talking about regular construction contracts. They should be looking at more in-house inspectors.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor El-Shantiri. Vice Chair Cloutier.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor El-Shantiri, you're referring to slide 9. I just got it. So you're referring to the Infrastructure Service Department, which takes care of my question. Thank you. I'd referred to page 74. Thank you. But just a quick question. Regarding 311, Can someone give me a percentage of the 1% are by email, the percentage of online, and the percentage of actual live calls that comes into 311, inquiries that come into 311?
Mr. Chair, so the total number of service requests requests that came into 311 was about 500,000. Of that, about 250,000 of those are service requests that we would process. Currently online, we're roughly, and it varies on the type of request, we're averaging at about 15% of those service requests are done, on top of that, are done through the online channel.
So the 500 requests, 5,000 come in by email, 1% approximately. 250 of those 500,000 are service requests. 15% of those service requests are online. So the other 250 plus 37,000 plus 37,000, 250 plus another 200,000 are, some are service requests, some come in online. If they're not service requests, what are they?
They would be information requests.
Just information?
That's right.
Okay, which is, and they come in via phone?
They come in via phone, and it would be 15% on top of that 500,000, in addition to the 500,000 that we answer that are done on the online channel, which we have no contact with it or touch points at all.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. In terms of the general audit report, Mr. Auditor General, just want to ensure that we recognize that all the recommendations were accepted by management?
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
And when can you usually do a follow-up audit on the implementation of the recommendations? And I know that vary, but roughly, what will the timeline be for those?
Mr. Chair, you likely see these, the follow-ups on these reports come back starting 2 years from now.
2 years, thank you. On a couple of specific items that are of interest to me, the accounts payable. On page 8 of the report, we found duplicate payment invoices, and you said that you found 3. Now, was that in terms of the testing you did, or is that the extrapolation of if you tested a certain number of transactions, extrapolated over the whole population of the transactions?
Mr. Chair, through you to the councillor, from the days when we first did this type of work, you can now go beyond samples and test 100% of the population.
Because you're sampling them electronically.
Yeah, that's correct. So 100% of the population was reviewed, and I think there was 1,500 duplicate payments were found, provided to management, and management had already found them and had already taken steps to recover the amounts.
1,497 of them?
Correct.
And there were 3 that they weren't aware of?
There were 3 that they weren't aware of.
I see. I understand. Thank you for that clarification. In terms of discounts and duplicate invoices, I read in the report that there's a certain configuration that can be automatically set when we put in a new vendor, or it can be manually set, or it's simply not set. Is there a reason why it is not configured automatically to check for duplicate invoice payments? Why that is a manual process?
I think you have to present that question specifically to management, but the risk with always selecting look for duplicate payments is you will end up having a false positive, where you're always told that there's a duplicate payment even when there isn't one.
because the system doesn't, our SAP system doesn't do a...
If I understand correctly, the biggest challenge is when you look for duplicate payments is the regular bills, the hydro bills, the gas bills, and the telephone bills. When we get a bill from ABC Lumber, it's got a number, it's got a unique invoice number on it. So it's easy to identify one ABC Lumber invoice from another ABC Lumber invoice. When it comes to the regular transactions, they're more difficult to distinguish because you've got Lord knows how many hydro bills, Lord knows how many gas bills for locations all over the city of different dates, and some of them might even be the same amount. So they might appear to be duplicate payments on an invoice when they're actually, just by coincidence, the same amount but different locations.
Are you saying that those vendors do not provide us a distinctive index number for each one of those documents? An invoice number?
I understand that it's these types of transactions that pose the greatest challenge, and provide the greatest number of false positives, which would also involve excessive staff time to investigate. But what we're suggesting is that you expand the use of the automated process, or use data analytics much as we did.
Mr. Kirkpatrick, is that the reason that the configuration is not set, and can we work with our vendors to, in an environment where we're using MarkView and automated payments, seems to me the distinctive index number is important.
I have to admit, Chair, I don't know the answer to that question, and I'm not sure Isabel does. Oh, there's Jeff Byrne. He always has the answers. Jeff?
Through the chair, Mr. Hughes is absolutely correct. What it generates is a lot of false positives, and so what happens is it's been our findings that it's taken a lot of work of staff to go through the false positives to identify the actual duplicate payments. And having said that, as well as that many of the processes that we turn on in MarkView, we also have to go in and confirm that MarkView is doing what it's supposed to be doing. So you can't totally eliminate some of the manual processes because they're essential to confirm that the system is doing what you expect it to do.
I understand. Regarding the ISD technical audit, and Councillor Chantieri asked one of the questions, did I read correctly that we're sole sourcing some contracts that are greater than $150,000, and what's the process to make sure that we're getting the best value for that money, that we're compliant with our obligations, sir?
Mr. Chair, through the Council, there is a process that is in place prior to going out and selecting a particular contractor to do the work. And in that process, which meets the terms of the purchasing bylaw, the abilities of the contractor to meet the requirements of the city are verified. And then there's a list of eligible contractors that can be used to do this work. And what we were suggesting is for contracts greater than $150,000 that you ask them to discount their prices a further 10% to ensure that you're getting value with that contractor who has already been through the rigidity of the purchasing process. Rather, I mean, you've got a number of alternatives. You could tender every job, and $150,000 is, it might sound like a large job to a lot of people, and it is, except that there are, there might be 300 of them in a year at the City of Ottawa. So when you look at the costs of retendering a job, the costs of retaining the job should be less than the potential benefits.
Yeah.
So if you're putting in a process where you're going to discount their prices further for jobs greater than a threshold, and we suggested $150,000, then you have assurance that you're getting best value for money without having to tender that project. And management agreed with that finding, and that provided an additional $350,000 of saving on an annual basis.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Cloutier. Now, I get to ask a few questions. Ms. Gray, could you please come back down? With 32 recommendations in the audit for 311, you're going to be doing a lot of back and forth today, I think. So my question for you is, I'd like to get an understanding of how you come up with your statistics. So when we say that we're reaching the standard, are you averaging the calls over the 24-hour period? How often, like how fast you answer a call over 24 hours? Or is it broken out differently?
We calculate our service level and our achievement of the service level based on the performance of every call and the aggregate of every call over, we look at it both daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly.
So it's not broken down in a period like hourly or anything to give you an indication of call volumes, between 10 and 11 a.m. I would suspect are a lot busier than between 1 and 2 a.m.
Mr. Chair, absolutely. So we would look at that throughout the day because we will have peaks, individual peaks, hour peaks, moment peaks where we have multiple callers that actually come in, and we may have a lower service level at that period of time. So we monitor that real time on a wallboard in the 311 call center. But in terms of our resource allocation and what we're trying to do in terms of managing our overall resource allocation, it's based on the trends and the normalized call volumes for the year.
Okay, would that information not be helpful to you, though? Because I think that's the explanation as to why, I know Councillor Egley is gone now, but he was speaking on what most of us as councillors experience, where people say, I tried to get a hold of 311, it was really, really busy, I waited a long time, I couldn't get through, and we respond, well, the service standard is, they're meeting that call. But I think this is the answer.
And through Mr. Chair, I think the auditor did a really good job at explaining and providing an example in the report when he looked at a specific period of time. So it shows you the peak times, and it shows you what that service level looks like. So when you look at 80%, which we're striving to, of those calls get answered in under 120 seconds. And then we do it in intervals to take a look at what's the longest interval of time. We're not trying to meet a service level standard of every single call within 80%. We're just not staffed for those peaks, and it wouldn't be reasonable or effective use of our resources to actually do that over the period of time. But you can see 91% of people that call 311, their calls are answered within 5 minutes, which is a fairly, in terms of performance, is a fairly good performance. And our satisfaction rate is 87% of our residents, and of our satisfaction for that period of time, just on timeliness alone, is 78%. So we're trying to balance the resource allocation of response and response time, resource allocation, and client satisfaction. And although, as per the audit recommendation, we can do better at managing those peaks, and that's what the auditor has asked us to do, is we look at the better use of our resources to manage that. But overall, it will be a resource against satisfaction discussion.
Thank you. Now, on the other issue about the emails, as you know, I've been talking to you since I got to this place about that issue. And I was quite impressed that you made a jump from trying to improve the emails to providing a place on the city's website where people could put in their service requests, and I believe they get a response right away from the website. Why wouldn't we move away from the emails if we can't get better than 5-day turnaround on email? Why wouldn't we just shut that service down and invest heavily in promoting the website, which I believe makes it a lot easier on a resource point as well, does it not? You already direct it to departments there?
Mr. Chair, that is correct, and that could be a decision of council. Other municipalities are definitely contemplating doing the same thing as they move to an online channel, and it is a consideration as you're looking at constrained resources and the best use of resource utilization to serve the public.
So to go back to what you said earlier, where you said there's some people that are using emails, can you provide any example of someone that would rather or has to send an email but couldn't use the website? Most phones today are smartphones, so I can't think of an example of where someone would do the email over the website if they knew about the website, given the turnaround.
Mr. Chair, I think what we see in the email is the really, really complex situations where people might have a complaint, multiple service issues in a particular area. They might have a number of issues that they want that we need to sort out how we would appropriately direct that. That's really what we see, and that's why the email channel is a complicated channel. Quite frankly, our preference would be, and has been, to direct them to the phone, because in the phone we can triage, we can sort through the information, and we can much more quickly. We handle a call in about 2.5 minutes on the phone. Our email takes us about 8 minutes. So although it doesn't sound logical to direct people to the phone, it's a more efficient utilization of the staff time we have to get the resident to where they need to get to and the appropriate action with the appropriate department.
The challenge, I think, though, Ms. Gray, is for residents that can't spend, 20 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever, on hold during your high peaks. So it's to offer an alternative there. Or, an example of flooding in an area, you're going to get hundreds of residents all contacting you with the same thing. If they could all come in through the website, where they would probably crash your phone system. Correct? So we have to have that option out there, that they can go online. I think we should be promoting it and building it more. So I hope you take that into consideration. Okay. Thank you. Next question for me was for Mr. Kirkpatrick on the bridge, the report on the Mackenzie King Bridge. Are you confident that we won't get that kind of a breakdown in the oversight now with the new steps that are put in, and not just on paving, but any of our major contracts?
Yes, Chair, I am. Not to put words in the Auditor General's mouth, but he did acknowledge that he's aware of a lot of work that has been done over the last year, and as I mentioned earlier, will continue for the next 2 years in terms of the integrated management program that Wayne Newell and Alain Gontier have they developed, and they started a year ago to respond to a lot of the recommendations that came out of previous audits of ISD, that came out of the independent review of the Airport Parkway Pedestrian Bridge project. I look forward to the time when, as Mr. Hughes said, when that work is completed. I won't be here, but I look forward to reading about the results of the audit of that work, because in my view it will confirm that we have identified the problems and we've resolved them.
Thank you. Now, if I can get Mr. Wiley to come down, let's talk about winter ops for a minute. I just have a couple of questions. While you're making your way down, maybe I'll set up the question. In the audit, in I believe it's page 71 or 72 in that area, it talks about potential savings of millions of dollars by simply asking for bids. And I'm kind of frustrated that we're not already doing that. But I wanted to check and see who would be responsible for doing that. Would that be your area, or is that procurement that does that for us?
That's correct, Chair. We work with procurement.
Procurement, okay. So I'll get Jeff to make sure that we've got that fixed. And I'm sorry, that my error there. I went into an ISD question there on you. The winter ops one, too, I wanted to ask you about the standard of service in my ward, because it's in Canada it's contracted out, correct? Is our service, are you seeing results better in our area, or are we worse than what you're getting across the city?
Chair, we endeavor to adhere to the City Council approved level of service throughout the city.
Okay. Thank you. And that's all I had for you. Thank you. Appreciate it. So ISD, sorry, Mr. Newell, if I could ask you that question that I had asked Mr. Wiley. The audit reports that there's potential savings of millions if you're getting 3 bids on the work that you're doing. I believe it's in the early 70s in the audit report. You're familiar with that piece?
Mr. Chair, let me just, are you in the technical management audit or the administrative audit?
Yeah, page. Maybe Mr. Hughes can help us. I've got it as, it's just before the recommendations start. 78 on yours? Okay, 78 in the book that you have.
Again, Mr. Chair, there's 2 ISD audits. One is a technical management, one is the administrative management. If you could help me out there, please.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, objective 8. 78? Under quality assurance.
This one there.
Okay, I'll come back to you because I'm using one with a different page number than you've got. So let me come back to you on that question. Maybe Councillor Leeper, if you want to ask yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm taking a look at the audit of IT risk management with a few questions. To start, it sounds like it's a bit of a Wild West environment at the City of Ottawa with respect to purchasing IT, understanding the risks, etc. I am very hopeful that some stability at the top with respect to our CIO and Director of Technology will begin to address that, and I'm pleased to see that management has agreed with a recommendation to more significantly embed the CIO at the center of a lot of IT purchasing and use, so that's welcome. One of the findings of the audit, though, jumped out at me. In some business units, and I'm looking at page 91, in some business units, people who have little or no technical training are being tasked under the ERM framework with the identification of risks and or related mitigation strategies. On page 83, we understand that those departmental evaluations are leading to the creation of our corporate risk profile. Can we trust our corporate risk profile at this point when we're being told what our risks are, if that has been developed with a significant number of people who don't have the technical background to feed into that?
Mr. Chair, through the Council, I think the point that we're making is these individuals not knowing what they don't know may not be identifying risks that they're unaware of, which is why we have to have a more comprehensive IT risk management framework that would relieve those individuals of that responsibility.
Right. I wonder if I can get a bit more color around that as well. It states they're being tasked, if I put it down like that. Are technical staff or management coming to them and asking them very explicitly, can you identify the technical risks associated here, or is it because people are purchasing software, they're recommending the use of software without the ability to ascertain what those risks are? What is that mechanism by which people are being tasked?
Mr. Chair, here referring to the individual manager's responsibilities under the enterprise risk management project, where you as a manager in whatever area of the city would identify what you see as the risks in your area to your ability to offer your program. And as I said at the beginning of the presentation, there are very few places at the city where there isn't some requirement to access technology, and in some places heavy access to technology. So if you've got an individual who's not an IT type, and yet they have a high reliance on systems of some sort, even if it's just a Word program or a spreadsheet program, then they would identify IT as IT processes as a risk for them. But they may not be aware of what lies below some of the activities, some of the systems, some of the information that they depend on.
Yep. Now this is, it's not a specifically City of Ottawa problem. Some of this exists in public and private enterprises as people are using technology on the devices that they bring into the work. Just using Dropbox, for example, raises potential risks, but these consumer-level tools are very tempting for people to want to bypass the CIO's office in order to get things done. Do you have some sense of whether or not the City of Ottawa is and doing any more poorly or any better than, public and private enterprises of our size?
Mr. Chair, we didn't compare the city to other entities, but what we did look at is what we would expect to see in an entity of this size and of this importance. Okay. And as you can see, we felt that there should be a better integration and a more holistic approach to risk management and IT.
And I'll look forward to seeing the city manager's proposals for embedding the CIO function more centrally in IT decisions moving forward. The other question I had for you was with respect to on page 98, and it was in your presentation as well. Notwithstanding these potential savings, it must be noted that necessary changes to upgrade, replace the city's infrastructure, and to adequately increase the city's IT security protection will require significant investment in coming years. Is that statement based on an accounting or an inventory that you have, or are you stating that as a motherhood or intuitive statement?
Mr. Chair, the councillor is correct. In the last statement, it's an intuitive statement. We know that with what the steps that have to be taken, it will cost money.
Okay, but we don't have that. There's not a document that you can put in. Okay, and that's obviously work that the IT subcommittee will take seriously as we continue to work with Mr. Duffett. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper. Councillor DeRoos, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to touch on the same question you asked. In the audit objective number 8 area, there is an area of potential saving, and it required to have a consultant to require 3 quote from consultant. It's not in the recommendation. If I look at the report properly, your number 8 objectives that we have a potential savings, it says in the report there, but it's not in the recommendation. And that's what I think Councillor Allen was looking for. I was wondering if there is a reason for that.
We had two separate audits in ISD. One was administrative and one was technical. And in this ISD report and in a previous one, we did indicate that improving their procurement practices with consultants would bring about savings. That specific one that's mentioned, and I forget the page, that was pointed out by Councillor Hubley, is in the administrative report, and that refers specifically to what page was it, Councillor?
78. I have
72? Yeah. No, I think it's before that.
The question is, if we have work to be done by construction company, we always require 3 quote or 3 prices, and then for consultant we can just go from the list and pick what we want.
And that's the point that we made in the last ISD report and this one, is that when you're going from your list of consultants, you have to, in our view, you have to introduce some refinement of your procurement practices to ensure you're getting value. And in the technical report, what we suggested and what management agreed to was for projects greater than $150,000, reduce the pricing by 10% would deliver savings. And the idea being that if you were to, we've got to be fully conscious of what the alternatives will cost. So if the alternative is to tender every job, there's a cost associated with the tendering. And there's also a capacity that the purchasing staff have to handle their work. So it wouldn't be prudent to increase our purchasing costs, our cost of operating our purchasing department, so that we could get better pricing on our construction jobs if those costs exceed the savings. So the middle ground that we suggested and management agreed in the technical report was rather than tender all of that work, and I think the number was something like 300 projects, and that's a significant amount of work, simply reduce the costing. And the same recommendation would apply to this work that was in the administrative report.
Thank you. That will bring me to my next question, that in the report you mentioned that we're looking to implement more inspection in-house, and do we have in the city qualified engineer to do this job? That will be my second question. Probably Wayne could answer this question for me.
Chair, on the inspection side, it's not a requirement for the inspection services on site to be an engineer, but you do have engineering oversight from the project manager. Similar as if we use external consultants, we would not just be engaging an inspector, but we would be engaging an overall contract administration team, which is a combination of engineers, technical people, and technical people on site that's trained to do construction inspection.
Thank you. One more question, Wayne. On a regular project that ISD does, how many engineer and how many project manager you have and how many CAs you have?
That's a difficult answer on when you have over 300 major projects. It does vary, but on the city side there is one project manager on a project, and then projects are either, from a construction perspective, administered internally versus externally, but there is, on a project, there was only one contract administrator, but you may have a $50 million project that you would have multiple inspectors overseeing the entire project.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One more question. Thank you. I just want to switch to the winter operation. Thank you, Wayne, for... through you, Mr. Chair, I just have a quick question to Kevin, please. Mr. Thank you very much. I just have a question about, we spend $75 million a year on winter operation. I like it. I see this chart on page 133, and I know we're trying to compare best practices between Toronto, Hamilton, and whatever. I just want to, it will be nice to have next time if we can have what will cost the City of Toronto for their operation, winter operation, so we can be able to compare how much we're spending in the City of Ottawa.
Through the chair, as the city manager mentioned, we'll be coming back in the spring with a pretty comprehensive report on winter operations. That will include a lot of benchmarking against other municipalities. Toronto is one of those municipalities.
Thank you, Kevin. My next question will be, can you please make sure that, I looked at the report and recommendation 8, 10, and 15, I know they're coming in 2016, but I just want to make sure they come to Transportation Committee also.
Through the chair, that would be the intention, is to report to TRC.
Thank you. One more. I know that we spend around $13 million in salt a year, and thank you very much for giving me those numbers. And I looked at the report, and it says we're not calibrating our machines enough. They're supposed to be calibrated twice a year. But when I look at the chart 134, and it breaks down the time that's spent in the shop, and I know there is 50% that, it's a nice chart, but there is 50% that staff, they do other activity. It will be nice if we make sure that we keep our eye on the saving for our tax dollar payer, to make sure we can save some money on the salt spreader if they'll be calibrated twice a year.
Through the chair, that would be the intention moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor DeRoos. So let's try this again. Mr. Newell and Mr. Byrne, it's going to be between the two of you on this. I've got a few questions to do with the contracting piece of it. And what I'm trying to get at, thank you for Councillor DeRoos to clarify the other piece, but also in the report, it talks about that we're not providing appraisals for the consultants and the contractors that we use. And I'm just wondering why we wouldn't do that, because to me that seems like a very valuable tool. Now, does that fall under IST or does that fall under procurement? Or both?
Or both, yes, under both. Jeff, do you, well, I'll respond to that, and Jeff can jump in. as you look in the audit, there's a number of areas that we were measured against with respect to the overall project delivery, and overall the compliance was very good. Two areas lacking was in the area of contractor and consultant performance. And what was happening was those weren't necessarily being done because the documents weren't being used to assist us in procurement opportunities. And so it was one of those parts that were not, the compliance was lower on. But since then, as of January of this past year, we've implemented a vendor performance management system, which is all about making sure that everybody performs well in the delivery of their services. And we now have a project management office in place to make sure that we have compliance of the appraisals, so that we can use those appraisals, to help everybody perform better, because the overall success of a project relies on our consultants and contractors to be successful. And also that information now, for the first time, the information contained in those appraisals helps us for future procurement decisions.
So you're going to be achieving close to 100% then with the...
That is absolutely our goal, yes.
Okay. And then you can use that information as well for when we go out to contract for other people? That's correct? Other jobs, I mean?
That's correct. That's our intent.
Okay. Now, on the question in here that was touched on earlier by the Auditor General to do with the contract thresholds, setting the contracts below the threshold and then upping the value afterwards, that, of course, I think would be of concern to everybody here on the committee, but perhaps you can shed some light on how that could happen, and
I'll take a crack at that, and maybe Mr. Hughes can jump in. So I think, first of all, when we referred to the audit, there was the objective when it talked about opportunities of $1 million savings. And if you look at the audit itself, recommendation 2 does address the issue of standing offers. So the standing offer is a process whereby we go through a process to qualify consultants, and then those consultants must provide hourly rates for us, because it's used for scopes of work that is yet to be determined. So it's a standing offer to say that for X number of dollars, we have qualified to be able to conduct the work. So that process right now is, once you're qualified, you go on a list that we can engage consulting firms up to $250,000. And through the course of this audit and working closely with the Auditor General, we saw an opportunity that we currently ask the rates to be reduced by 5% when the assignment's over 100, but it would be a 5% reduction up to the $250,000 threshold. Through looking at opportunities for further savings and realizing the effort it would take to go through a more formal process, we now, in the recommendation, are suggesting that there be a further reduction, netting a result of an overall 10%, which, based on the number of call-ups, translates into what we estimate at this point in time, $350,000.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Newell. Did you want to add anything to that, Mr. Bird?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Thank you both. That's the end of my questions. If there's no other questions, we have a motion to move forward. We're good? Okay, Councillor Cloutier, with your motion to go in camera.
Thank you, Chair. Moved by myself that in accordance with Procedure Bylaw 2014-441, the Audit Committee resolve in camera pursuant to subsection 13(1)(a) the security of the property of the city based upon the rationale set out in the legal implications section of the report titled Office of the Auditor General Annual Report and Detailed Audit Reports, in order to receive from the Auditor General the Information Technology Security Incident Handling and Response Audit, which will not be reported out.
Motion carried. Great, okay. So we're going to take a recess, half hour. Well, how about we come back for 1:30, and that'll give staff a chance to get the room ready for the in-camera meeting. We'll be in camera at that time. Thank you. Thank you all. entitled Office of the Auditor General Annual Report and Detailed Audit Reports, end of quote. Now, on the report recommendation, are we received? Received, thank you. Now, seeing no other items, I think we are good to go. Is there any notices of motion for next meetings? Hearing none. Any inquiries? Gone. Any, no other business? So could I have a motion to adjourn, please? Motion to adjourn from Councillor Alcantara. Carried? Okay. Thank you, everybody. Meeting adjourned.